Could nobody hear me?
Now it's on.
Oh, should I start over?
No.
I'm going to be behind, and Regent Swigham's going to yell at me. Welcome to Student Representatives Mackenzie Dyson, J.L. Karandi. I am going to start by shifting to the chair of the board, Dave McMillan, to say a few words.
Thank you, Chair Omari. After repeated appearances here and as she coined it well, unexpected and reappearances, today is by almost any measure Regent Cohen's last opportunity to be with us at this committee. We're going to press her into service to chair the audit committee at 11 o'clock. But when the legislature meets today and makes decisions in the joint convention, we will almost certainly be saying goodbye to Regent Cohen, and I wanted to take this opportunity on behalf of the board to once again express this board's, this university's deepest gratitude for 12 plus years of amazing leadership and service, and I've said this before, but personal mentorship to this regent. We owe a debt of gratitude to Linda Cohen. So, thank you.
Thank you, David. It has certainly been my deep pleasure to be part of this board for these past 12 years and a couple months.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. In light of that, as we, in the next 2 months, come to a transition period around committees, I'd also like to thank Regent Lucas for being the co-chair of this committee, and to the staff from the Provost office, including Provost Hanson, as well as Joe Schultz and Deb Cran, and the one and only Maggie Flotten for guiding me through these last 2 years and being a great partner in the work that we do. So thank you to all of those folks as well. Our first item today for business is promotion and tenure, titled Context, Policy, and Process, Rationale and Role of Tenure in Higher Education. This is a discussion item, and I'd invite Provost Hanson and Vice Provost Ropers, as well as Professor Blank, to the table.
Thank you, Chair Omari and members of the committee. This is an annual report, and some of you have heard some of these points before, but tenure is an extremely important subject in higher education, and we want to stress some of the features that are important about it and why this process is regarded by us as one of the most important processes that we engage in throughout the year. We are evaluating faculty across the entire university system for promotion and tenure, and evaluating professionals for continuous appointments. The Board of Regents policy on faculty tenure defines faculty categories. There are two types of faculty at the University of Minnesota: regular faculty who have tenure or are tenure eligible, and term or contract faculty who are appointed annually or for several years at an appointment. They are not eligible for tenure. All individuals with faculty rank must engage in scholarship, teaching, and service or public engagement. But the two categories of regular faculty and term or contract faculty have a different mix of responsibilities between and among those activities. Regular faculty typically engage in more research, and that's balanced with teaching and service responsibilities. Contract faculty typically do more teaching or clinical service or practice, and that's balanced with typically some research. The largest numbers of contract faculty are clinicians hired in the academic health center, colleges, particularly the med school. The hiring decision, and this is really important, the hiring decision is regarded by faculty and the administration as the first tenure and promotion decision when you're hiring regular faculty. Having the opportunity to hire a faculty member into, or a potential faculty member into a faculty line is regarded as a huge responsibility, first on the part of the department, and they're allocated typically by deans. When the department gets a chance to hire a faculty member, they're thinking, will this person be somebody we can tenure? When they're hired into a tenure track, the expectation is that you want to hire someone who will proceed successfully to tenure. So they're looking in terms of that kind of possibility. It matters a lot to all the people involved, because the people who are hired into a faculty department make a part of the department identity, and faculty think together about those things. Who will be somebody who will add to the luster of their field, or and succeed in it, and fill gaps that they need filled in perhaps their teaching or research areas. It matters to everybody, and people are careful. They advertise, they read applications carefully, and then they interview people in person, and they discuss robust discussions. The faculty we hire at this university really do come from the best universities in the U.S. and around the world. Once they're hired, they begin what we call the probationary period. They have to, in this period, establish a trajectory of independent scholarship or research. They have to publish in peer-reviewed journals or at presses. They have to publish, depending upon the field, articles, books, book chapters, or they need to produce creative works if they are in fields where that's appropriate, creative writing, music, theater, that sort of thing. They have to prove themselves to be effective teachers and advisors or mentors in a whole variety of settings. Again, those might vary depending upon the particular department or college, but typically they have to show that they can work with undergraduates, with graduate students. They may have to be appropriately supervising students in laboratories and in their research development that goes on for our students, or in creative endeavors. They need to, in the probationary period, establish a record of their own independent work that gives them a reputation that is either national or international or both, so that when the tenure time comes, people know them and can speak to the work that they do. In addition to the university criteria for tenure, which are general, each unit sets its own particular criteria and standards. Those are defined by the faculty of each unit for what teaching, research, and creative activity or service and public engagement really mean, given their disciplinary specialties. You know, obviously, research excellence and the proof of research excellence is defined differently in, say, chemical engineering than it is in architecture or English or theater and dance or philosophy. The products are different of research or creative activity, and those are the things that are evaluated by their peers. Probationary, that is to say pre-tenure faculty, have detailed annual reviews to determine if they're to be reappointed. Every year they document the review and they provide advice to us. It is a reappointment review, but in having that review, the department typically provides detailed advice to the probationary faculty member about how they're proceeding toward tenure, what more they may need to do to be viable candidates for tenure, and how best to develop their careers. The reviews that are documented each year are based on both university and department criteria and standards. So, as you probably know, there are 3 professorial ranks for regular and contract faculty, but only regular faculty can have tenure. Promotion to professor with tenure involves the most rigorous standards. That's when people are then going to be in the position of judging new probationary faculty. You have to have made significant progress toward, since the last promotion, and that is at the tenure decision, you have to have a national or international reputation. And how do we judge that? We depend a lot on external reviewers. I mean, people make their own judgments within the department, but we need arm's length reviewers so that people's friendships, do not play a role in their evaluation of probationary faculty members. And there are a variety of other indicia, the indications of whether or not people have established those reputations. Are they invited speakers at important national and international meetings? When a topic comes up, do people turn to them for, the delivery of their research? Do they have editorships of important journals or book series? Do they had research sections for the NIH or the NSF? If they're artists, do they have shows in important museums and galleries? Are their books reviewed, and what do the book reviews say? What's their grant funding record? Can they write good grant proposals and have them respected by peer reviewers? It's a variety of things that, again, that make a difference, but they're all, in some basic way, they involve judgments, but they are also objective. For contract faculty, the criteria are slightly different. They may look at all of these elements of teaching, research, and service, but they may also think about things like how well they do in their clinical and extension activities. And there's different sorts of evidence gathered for that. But again, these are rigorous judgments made by peers. The key aspect for the review process is really the process of external review. Again, the internal reviews go on every single year, but at this key point for extension of either a contract or tenure, external review is extraordinarily important. And the people who are chosen to be the reviewers are justified by the department in the materials that they send forward for further either college and university review. They say why these external reviewers are reasonable people to choose as reviewers of the candidate. They themselves have national or international reputations for their research or other creative activity. And as I say, the dossiers usually at some length describe the reviewers and give indications of why they're chosen and why their judgments are sought by the department, why their judgments are important and should be respected. Obviously, as you go up the process of review, you're getting further and further away from people who have expert knowledge in the field. So at the later stages of review, we're depending on these kinds of indications of standing in the field that can be supplied by those who are in the field. I will say that external reviewers from the most prestigious universities in the world do provide letters for our candidates that evaluate the scholarship and creative work that they're doing. And we can see in the dossiers, why these reviewers have been chosen. I think you went too far. So this, okay, the part I slipped through quickly here may have been some kind of Freudian slip, because that describes what's in a dossier, but it doesn't describe the length of the dossier. These dossiers are, they're minimally 300 pages. One this go around was over 1,100 pages. They are extensive, documenting the candidate's activities, and you would, if you haven't looked at one of these documents, you would be astonished at how detailed the external evaluation letters are. This is work that people do for other universities, really for no recompense, but because they care about their professions, and they evaluate in detail candidates we present to them. There's a description of whether or not the evaluations are at arm's length, whether they have anything to gain or lose by either evaluating somebody negatively or positively, and basically people have to have arm's length reviewers. And people look very carefully at the work that the candidate has produced. And again, there's a tremendous amount of documentation of both the work and then the judgments that are made about the work by people closest to the field. This is the, something like a flow chart, if you go from the bottom up, about how these massive dossiers proceed through the department, the collegiate, and the provostial level. This is the process, because, the candidate with assistance from typically a mentor or the department chair, somebody in the department, assembles the dossier. It goes out for external review, or some sub-portion of it does. And then the unit looks at those materials that have been assembled and makes the first vote. No matter what, whether that's positive or negative, the department chair reviews independently. The college and campus promotion and tenure committee reviews the materials that have been assembled thus far and votes. And then the dean or the chancellor reviews and makes a recommendation, which then comes into my office. This is the process that is followed for the Twin Cities, for Crookston, for Morris and Rochester candidates. From the Duluth campus, it's important to note, have a different process. It's mostly the same, but given their UEA contract, union contract, the recommendation for promotion and tenure is made by the chancellor and is sent to us to include with the other recommendations we're going to be making to you today. Now, I've talked about how important the review is at the department level, where people are closest in the knowledge base to the candidates who are being put up. So we wanted to give you a finer grained account of that. And it is the most crucial place for evaluation of faculty on an ongoing basis. Annual evaluations are made of faculty, before and after tenure. But the decisions at P&T time are especially important. But it's an ongoing activity, the peer evaluation of faculty. And so we've asked Professor David Blank, who's head of the Department of Chemistry and the College of Science and Engineering, to share his perspectives on the hiring, review, and promotion and tenure processes. David is the 3M alumni professor and distinguished university teaching professor of chemistry, as well as department head. He earned his BS at UCLA and his PhD at UC Berkeley, where he also postdoced. His own research is in experimental physical chemistry and chemical physics, as well as nanoscience and materials chemistry. He's one of many faculty in that department we'd consider field shapers. And he's also administering a unit that has responsibilities. This is really, partly it's because David is wonderful that we've asked him here, but it's also important for you to know that chemistry teaches thousands of students every semester. So the people we tenure into chemistry make a difference in the educational experience of an awful lot of our students. It's not just the chemistry majors, but chemistry is required for so many majors, and people are interested in taking it anyway. So we've asked David to talk briefly a little bit about the process of hiring and the tenure and promotion review process, and the value of tenure in maintaining the chemistry department's mission and its high quality.
Thank you, Provost Hanson. And Professor Blank, it looks like Vice President Kramer really agrees that you're a field shaker, because he's in the background shaking his head. Please, Professor Blank.
I think I'll agree with that. Well, thank you, Provost Hanson, Chair Omari, and the board. Good morning. I hope I give you a flavor of a sort of a departmental level view of this, but of course, much of it is redundant with what you just heard. We follow the process that was outlined and with some specifics. So hiring, supporting, and promoting the best young faculty members is, in my opinion, the most important aspect of building and maintaining an exceptional university. We compete for the most promising young teacher scholars in the world. To give you a sense of what it takes just to get in the door, a tenure-track assistant professor opening in our department typically receives over 300 applications with at least 2 years of postdoctoral academic training beyond the PhD. Based on cover letters, the CV, teaching statements, letters of recommendation, diversity statements, and 3 independent research proposals, a committee of 4 to 5 faculty in our department select the top 30 for phone interviews. From those, 6 to 8 are selected for on-site interviews. The on-site interview is 2 days long and includes multiple meetings with faculty and the department head. and the presentation of 2 seminars. The first of those seminars is presented to show academic achievement and scholarship that they've already taken care of, and the second seminar is a presentation to defend those independent proposals, all 3 of them. Following completion of the interview, the entire faculty vote to determine one top candidate to receive an offer. That's 1 out of 300 qualified applicants. At this point, it's common for us to be competing with as many as 10 other top-tier institutions for that same candidate. So we compete for and with the best. Once hired, performance of a probationary faculty member in teaching, research, and service is evaluated annually by a committee of tenured faculty. They present that case to our entire faculty for discussion and comment, and then there is an annual in-person review with the department head. At the end of the probationary period, a complete dossier of accomplishment during their independent career in Minnesota is submitted for evaluation, and you heard that that is a substantial dossier. And that includes evaluation by our faculty, but importantly, 10 of the most respected scholars from around the world in the candidate's area of scholarship. The general criteria for promotion requires, and I'll quote from what's called our 712 statement, those are our departmental requirements for tenure. Above all, intellectual distinction and academic integrity. The basis for awarding indefinite tenure to the candidates possessing these qualities is the determination that each is established and is likely to continue to develop a distinguished record of academic achievement that is the foundation for a national or international reputation or both. In short, to be awarded tenure, we require demonstrated and ongoing dedication to exceptional performance in all aspects of the mission, teaching, research, and service. The recommendation of the unit, as you saw, is followed by the independent evaluation by the College Level Promotion Committee, the Dean, and the Provost. The comprehensive and rigorous nature of the promotion process reflects the very high value of tenure to both the institution and the faculty member, as well as the responsibility that comes with it. Tenure provides the intellectual agency that is necessary to successfully challenge the current boundaries of our knowledge. It is this pursuit that attracts and drives the most creative and successful faculty members. The awarding of tenure opens the door to pushing ever harder at those boundaries, with the associated increase in expectations and responsibility for positive impacts on our students, our institution, our state, and our nation. My tenured colleagues at the University of Minnesota are among the hardest working, most dedicated, exceptional teachers and scholars that I know. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Blank.
Thanks. Well, I'll now ask Vice President Ropers to provide some details about this year's promotion and tenure decisions.
Chair Omari and Regents, it's my pleasure to present some of the information about what specifically happened during this year's P&T process. This first slide shows the numbers of candidates in each faculty group for tenure and promotion. As you'll see, 66% or 158 out of 241 of the cases involve what we call regular or tenure track, tenure system faculty. This slide shows the specific recommendations for contract faculty and their promotion. There are 83 cases this year, and as Provost Hanson said earlier, most of these are in the medical school. This slide shows the specific recommendations for each faculty group for tenure and promotion. 92 faculty were considered for tenure decisions, and most of these, 83, were at the assistant professor level. 65 faculty were considered for promotion only, and all of these were tenured associate professors who were up for promotion to full professor. 2 assistant professors who were considered are not being recommended for promotion and tenure this year, and 1 associate professor who was considered for promotion to full professor is not being recommended for that promotion. Here we illustrate the breakdown in terms of the numbers and types of cases at each of our campuses. As you'll see here, the number of promotions of regular faculty reflects the relative size of each campus. So this process the process is not quite different, but the numbers of people affected are quite different at all of our campuses. So each year, we share with the board information about the tenure success rate of our faculty. Those of you who have been on the board for some time might remember this conversation. Given the very high standards that we hold for faculty to become tenured and promoted here, it might be surprising that only 2 of the 83 faculty under consideration were not recommended for tenure and promotion to associate professor. It is important to remember the hiring process that Professor Blank articulated, though. in that we bring some of the most outstanding scholars in the nation and the world here to start their assistant professor roles with us at the university. Once they are here, a tenure success rate is a useful way to show the different outcomes of faculty who have begun their academic careers with us. As Professor Blank shared in his earlier remarks, we have a rigorous annual review process in which people are both given advice about how to succeed while they are here, as well as an indication of whether or not they are on track to be successful in their promotional process. And because of that process, some faculty do decide to leave the institution before they go up for promotion and tenure consideration. Others, though admittedly not many, are asked to make that decision earlier before they're considered for promotion and tenure. So to determine the tenure success rate, we look at a cohort of assistant professors and then look at where they are 7 years later. And there are 4 possible outcomes for those who are hired as assistant professors at the university. Some have received tenure and are still here at the university. Some have received tenure, but then shortly thereafter accepted positions elsewhere. Some left the university without receiving tenure, and those people were either denied tenure after going through the process or decided to pursue other options outside of the university before being considered. And some are still at the university but have not yet been considered for tenure. And this is typically either because they've stopped their tenure clock through doing an extension, either because of parental or caregiving responsibilities, or because they are in, a few of our colleges have longer probationary periods. So it is the case that in some colleges, one would not have needed to go up by that 7-year period. So they could still be in that probationary track and doing just fine. So our tenure success rate then is the percentage of tenure track faculty who have received tenure at the university out of all of those who began their time with us, whether or not those faculty are still here at the university. So that includes those who got tenure and then left. So we then look at the faculty over a 3-year period to ensure a more stable analysis and to take out any anomalies that might have happened in one particular year, and then come up with a tenure success rate. So this year, we're looking at faculty who started at the university during the academic years of 2010, 11, and 12. And overall, our tenure success rate is 70%, which is largely consistent with recent years. So to be clear, 70% of the outstanding assistant professors that we hired who began at the University of Minnesota are tenured within that first 7 years. We now turn to the category that we call continuous appointments. A small number of academic professionals have continuous appointments and have probationary periods of 6 years, after which they are reviewed. This employment category is primarily comprised by university librarians and other highly skilled professionals. So this year, 2 assistant librarians are being recommended for continuous appointment. So I now turn back to Provost Hanson for her recommendations to the board.
Going on the materials in your docket, we want to recommend that the regular faculty candidates on the list be approved for tenure and promotion as indicated, that the contract faculty candidates listed be approved for promotion to the rank indicated, and that the academic professional candidates listed receive continuous appointment and promotion as indicated.
Thank you to the presenters. And members, just for reference, this first agenda item, we will not be taking a vote. We'll take the vote in the second agenda item. So this recommendation is actually for number 2 of our item. This one is solely for discussion. So given that we've just had that great overview of our perhaps most important thing that we do as fiduciaries of the institution, thinking about and understanding the promotion and tenure process, I open the floor for questions, comments, and discussions. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters. Going through the presentation and the background materials, it's a little bit difficult to see how diversity is at work or how it's working in the numbers that you presented, because the only numbers I could see were basically as tenure track versus non-tenure track, but I couldn't really see what the diversity looks like within the layers. And the various ranks. And maybe this is a question also that could be answered in the next part of the presentation where we actually talk about who's been recommended. But is there any more better data that you might have in a backup slide or something that could show us more detail?
Provost Hanson?
Chair Omari and Regent Shu, we can provide those data. We didn't provide those data in this presentation about the granting of promotion and tenure because diversity considerations are particularly important as we're seeking to make new appointments. But in the evaluation processes that lead to the promotion and tenure decision, that's not an explicit criterion of ethnic diversity.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Shu.
Yeah, thank you. No, I understand that. I'm just trying to see how things are going at the various levels so that we can determine if we can't get diversity in at the lowest level, then we're going to have a problem, maybe even 25 years from now or 35 years from now. So I'm just trying to understand kind of how we look today, not necessarily whether or not we're applying that as one of the criteria. But
Chair,
And let me jump in, please, if I can, Provost Hanson. The HR report in finance and operations, I think they actually have some numbers in that docket, so you might ask that same question there, and they might have an answer. But Provost Hanson?
thank you, Chair Omari and Regent Shu. Yeah, we do have those data, and we can definitely supply them. If they're not in today's presentation from HR, we can definitely get them to you.
thank you.
Regent Beeson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters. It's a good report. The data point that I focus on is the success rate, and so 70% strikes me as a pretty good number. If it were significantly lower, it would be an indication that we're not hiring well. And if it's much higher, then it's maybe an indication we're not rigorous enough in granting the granting of tenure. So, is it industry? Do you think 70%? Does that feel like we're in the norm? Does somebody have any like to? But to me, that's the most important part. Is from a policy and oversight standpoint, that data point.
Provost Hanson?
Chair Omari and Regent Beeson, thank you. I think that that analysis is exactly right. It is a matter of careful decisions. And the reason that that it's not 100% is not only that we have rigorous reviews and and we take seriously the need to prove the worthiness for tenure. It's also that even the most discerning faculty members, as they're making those initial decisions about hiring, can't always predict about a given candidate whether or not they can develop the independent trajectory that's really needed for a faculty member. They may have been great students and done very well when they were under the tutelage of their doctoral advisors, but in developing that independent trajectory is the one slightly imponderable. It's not as if there aren't indications of whether or not that's likely to happen, but there's so many responsibilities that faculty have to develop into great independent teachers, to be great independent researchers, and so all of it isn't predictable at the end of graduate school. But I think you're right that it's about the right percentage, showing careful hiring and rigorous evaluation.
Regent Swigum?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Provost Hanson, if I could, I don't know the answer to this question, so I've heard multiple answers. First of all, I respect and understand the value of tenure. I understand its value. Second of all, to my question, is tenure granted by the University of Minnesota? Is it granted by the school like Crookston or Duluth? Or is it granted by the college, like College of Veterinary Medicine and
Provost Hanson?
College of Law?
Chair Omari and Regent Swigum, it's granted by the university.
By the university?
By
So
you.
Excuse me?
By you.
Okay. Then to my question, then, I've heard that, and I don't know the answer, that when tenure is granted to a professor in a school, suppose we don't need that professor in that school. Suppose that there isn't enough students, suppose that, we don't have enough classes or research being done there. can we move that tenured professor to another school, say from law school to Carlson School, that we may need that person?
Provost Hanson?
Chair Omari, Regents Swigum, sometimes faculty do move from one department to another,
Can
and,
we move that person, not by their choice, by our choice?
well, I guess in some sense it depends on what you mean by we move them. They would need to be accepted.
Let me be very clear. I think we maybe have more professors at the law school right now than we need for the number of students we have there. Perception. We're losing money at the law school, right?
Right.
A lot of the money is stuck in professors, right? Okay, you're answering my question. If necessary, for efficiency, can we move a professor from law school to Carlson School or Humphrey School or someplace where we can use them in the classes and programs? Yes or no?
Just for clarity, Regent Swigum, are you saying can the board move them or can the
The
administration?
administration.
Got it.
Yeah, I'm not going to move anybody anyplace. I'm not smart enough to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Provost Hanson?
Chair Omari, Regent Swigum, neither am I going to be in a position to know whether or not somebody in the law school can teach in another department. Part of it is, that, again, the consultation you'd make with the faculty in the relevant department. We do have members of the law school teaching in other units. For example, we have people who are in the law school who teach in the history department. So that does happen. And it happens both because of the particular interests people have, the specializations they have, and the interests other people have in them. And perhaps because they have the capacity to do it and aren't needed for teaching in a particular area. But again, it has to be a fit not only with their credentials, but with the expectations of the unit into which they'd be moved.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Regent Swigum?
Provost Hanson, you're telling me there is some flexibility,
Yes.
but it's determined by need, program, ability. Okay, so there is some flexibility.
Yes.
I've been told both, that we can't move a professor from law to Carlson or law to Humphrey, and then I've been told that we can't. So you have told me that there is some flexibility.
Chair Omari, Regent Swigum, I'm saying there's flexibility depending upon the credentials and the needs of both areas. It's not as if we can simply pluck a faculty member or, the administration or anybody can pluck a faculty member out of one field and set them down in another because they may not have the relevant expertise.
I would hope that needs and credentials would be primary, would be predominant. I would hope that'd be true, but then there is some flexibility after that. Thank you.
President Kaler?
Chair Omari, Regent Swigum, if I could just add, the historical component here is that when General College was closed, there were faculty in that college that were dispersed to various other units. And the principle at play here is that academic units self-select the members of their faculty. So indeed, if someone is qualified, that is accepted by the faculty, they can come and be productive. We would not insert a faculty member into a department if he or she were unwanted by the colleagues or unqualified to be a member of the department. So as is the case in almost everything, there's a balance that we try to strike.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
President
Chairman,
Kaler.
also, I would guess if they are a tenured faculty member, they have some capabilities and ability, that there's not a question of their ability at all.
That Regent, Chair Omari, Regent Swigum, that's true, but people are differently abled. So were we to run out of students in agronomy, the agronomy professors perhaps would not necessarily transfer to the law school, but there are places we would look for them.
Thank you. Regent Cohen?
Thanks, Chair Omari. Thanks for the information and the report. Professor Blank, it sounds as though if you're after this, if you start with 300 applicants for a spot, and then you do the phone calls, and then you do the interviews, and then you're after the one top person, and you mentioned that about 10 other prestigious institutions are also after that one top person. So what does the university, how do we get that one top person? And I'm sure we do sometimes and don't sometimes, but what do we do to try to get that? Sounds like very competitive.
So Chair Omari and Regent Cohen, we do everything we can. So it is one of the great challenges, is to compete, to get the very best candidates to be on our faculty. And oftentimes, we are out-resourced at the basic numbers with our competition. But the kinds of things we can offer is a better climate. And in our department, we take that very seriously. And so we have found that that is a substantial advantage when we are able to recruit. And we also have that climate includes the nature of how we go about our business, the collaborative nature of how our colleagues get along. And I hate to say that it's unusual that people are collaborative and work well together, but it's not as common as you might think in academic units and other institutions. So that's a great advantage for us. The Twin Cities is a great place to live. We use that as well. It's a great institution. So working for a great institution in the mission and the appreciation for that mission, I think, translates. But it remains one of the great challenges. So we actually have an offer out right now. My understanding is it's a fine private institution on the West Coast in Silicon Valley that is our primary competition. And we will, I hope we are successful, but it's really hard.
Thank you.
Have him call Vice President Kramer. We'll make him come. You'll get him to come. Regent Powell.
I've done my best. I'll call again.
Regent Powell.
Chair Omari, thank you, and thank you presenters. And tell that person housing prices West Coast insane. So here's what's in the back of my mind, a little bit related to some of the other questions. It has to do with the advantages of developing from within. I think you really can watch people develop. We really get to know them. We can control our own destiny in many ways, the talent pipeline. But I think you'd also hear that over-reliance on that can lead to groupthink, insularity. People just you don't get as much innovation. And so the question really is how do we think about not circumventing our own tenure process, but I'm sure there are times where we want to bring in full professors or associate professors who are on the brink of promotion, and that is really healthy, for the institution. And so if you could talk a little bit about how you view bringing in folks from who really developed in other institutions. Is that an important tool? How often do we do that? Professor Blank, Provost. Yeah.
So Chair Omari and Regent Powell. You can have a tremendous impact on a program by bringing in a top scholar at a level with tenure and beyond. There, the resource allocation issue becomes even more challenging. And it is, in the way, at least within the sciences and chemistry that I'm familiar with, that challenge is that those top performers are sought after by many institutions. Mm-hmm. And so you get into very high value for them, and it takes a lot to attract them to your institution. And that, for us, tends to be a barrier that makes it very hard to go after someone at a mid or upper career level. But we look for opportunities, and sometimes those opportunities include the need to move to the Twin Cities, for example. But on just straight resource allocation, it's even more challenging than at the assistant professor level.
Chair Omari and Regent Powell, I mean, in general, we are hiring from the outside, partly because of this close relationship between
earlier in the process.
Well, yeah, and it's not that our own products aren't wonderful; they are. It's just that because they work closely with a faculty member here, that wouldn't add enough intellectual diversification often, or we have coverage in a given area, and it's just healthy to have a career that includes moving to a different sort of setting. So in general, the faculty we hire at the introductory level are coming from elsewhere and have been trained elsewhere. The issue about pulling people back in at another level is it's challenging because of resource issues, as David has said. One other thing that is an important thing to emphasize about the ecosystem of academia here is that when we do all this external reviewing of one another, I mean, we seek external reviews from other faculty members. Our faculty members are being sought to do external reviews of other institutions' candidates. That involves shopping around the person's dossier. And so that is a very vulnerable time for us to lose faculty, our promising faculty. We send their dossiers out and say, look at this, what do you think of this person? And often that leads
We
to
like 'em a
external
lot.
offers.
In fact, we'll have that person.
Yes, and so, and particularly if they're a better resource than we are, it is even if that's an institutional issue we face, and it's one of the reasons we're trying to do more recognition of people as they come into the tenured associate level.
Quick follow-up.
Regent Powell.
Thanks, Chair Maurer. And just a quick follow-up, just a detailed question. Professor without tenure, and I think you mentioned that is primarily used in the medical school. But can we just talk a bit about, I mean, I didn't fully understand that role.
Provost
That-
I
Hanson.
think it's referred to as professor without tenure.
Yeah. Chair Omari and Regent Powell. The medical school, because of its particular range of responsibilities, has a lot of contract professors. And so they have specific terms, years of guaranteed employment, and those can be renewed, but it isn't the same as a tenure. And part of the reason for that, I mean, there may be many reasons for it, but often it's because the mix of responsibilities is slightly different and has a much heavier clinical component, whereas tenure in its origins is meant to guarantee academic freedom. And so it's particularly tied to the research function.
Thank you. Thank you. Regent Simonson?
Thank you, Chair Amari, and thank you, presenters. This maybe relate to some of the previous questions as well, but how is post-tenure review done? Is there a process for that, and do we have any data on that?
Provost Hanson.
Chair Amari and Regent Simonson, there are two things that might be meant by post-tenure review. I mean, there is annual review of all faculty, so even post-tenure. So in that sense, post-tenure review is an everyday thing. There is also something that's called post-tenure review that is a more extensive process if the annual reviews suggest to the department in particular that the faculty member is not contributing at the level that's expected of a tenured faculty member. And then there are a specific set of recommendations or policies that we follow in order to either begin a process of disassociating the person from the tenure at the institution or coming up with a plan for remediation. But the plan for remediation is tied to consequences if progress isn't shown.
Regent Anderson.
Thank you. Thanks, Regent Omari. Regent Simonson's question answered part of mine, but it also gets to part of Regent Svigum's question. It's interesting to me, my brain kind of works in putting things into the least common denominator, and as Professor Blank was talking about the 300 people for one position and what you have to do, it somewhat reminded me of professional sports and the free agent market and how the market economy has been great for professors. I mean, it probably has. Market economy, market and free economy, and faculty positions. So, again, I'm learning this stuff. The finance of the university is easier, comes to me, and the academic stuff comes more difficult. So if I'm sound elementary on this question, I want to ask, in the free agent sports market, somebody might be signed for a 4-year or a 6-year contract, and we all see that person's underperforming, and that team lives with them for 4 or 6 years, and they're gone. The team made a mistake in doing what they did. I'm guessing if we grant 100 positions of tenure, we don't have a batting average of 1,000. What happens to that underperformer? And you just answered part of this for Regent Simonson. But what do we do when we see that one of those people is underperforming from our point of view? To most people, when we say tenure, whether it does or not, it almost means employment as long as they want it. And I think that's where Regent Svigum was getting at without saying it. But is there a process more extensive than what you answered for Regent Simonson about what happens when we make a mistake?
Provost Hanson?
Chair Omari, and Regent, Anderson, the process is more extensive than I described. The post-tenure, you're talking specifically not just about the annual reviews and what might be consequences that follow from that, which involve salary setting often. But the post-tenure review process is quite extensive and involves a sort of specification of what has to be shown as improvement over a period of time. And there are consequences, including loss of tenure, if those stipulations aren't met. Kind of what that would involve in a given case may depend on the field and the expectations, again, in the field. But generally, it involves, much more intensive oversight during that period and a written specification of the progress that has to be made in the area which is seen to be deficient. Is there anything more you want to say about that?
Chair Omari, Regent Anderson, the only other thing that I would add to that is that Professor Blank referred to our 712 policies that set out department guidelines. In each one of those department statements, there is a section on goals and expectations for performance. In the process of annual reviews, one of the things that the unit is looking at is, has this person met these goals and expectations that have been clearly articulated for each unit? If they have not, then that's when this performance improvement plan kicks in. And in the best of circumstances, what we're really trying to do is to get faculty back on board, because perhaps they've had something happen in their life, perhaps they just need some support to shift in their research focus, perhaps something else has happened. So what we're really trying to do, and how our policies are set up, is to try to get people back. Now, that doesn't always work. And there are cases each year, some of which move forward into the post-tenure review process, and people end up leaving in whatever way. But sometimes people realize either that they're done with their career and they step away from that process after reflecting in that time, after having their behavior or their lack of productivity being called out.
I just need to learn more and more, and so I appreciate your answers, and it's kind of a quest for knowledge on my part, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Provost Hanson, did you want to add?
Chair Omari and Regent Anderson, and the other thing that I'd say, just to add to what Vice Provost Roper's mentioned, is that the specifications about what people need to be doing at those levels, we've focused a lot on what it is to get tenure, but the expectations are articulated for all ranks, including full ranks. So the expectation that you be doing such and such, and that's what could trigger the kind of additional review and putting somebody essentially on a kind of probation.
Thank you.
Regent Beasley?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the follow-up. In my world, in the business world, it's the old adage about hire slow, fire fast. So when people, as you look back on people that we've had to get rid of, it's almost instantly apparent that they're not going to work out. So I would encourage you, I'm sure you do this, you can see where there's a mishire, you want to you have the process to go through, but you're not doing anybody any favors by keeping people around who are just not going to be good fits. So I would assume that's how you're also operating, and encourage you to be realistic about it. It is point to the need for great hiring. I mean, it's all about the hiring event, and as much resources and training as you can give to your department heads and deans to make quality hires. And I know you're doing that. But it's really that moment of hiring that takes care of pretty much everything after that fact. Thank you.
Regent McMillan?
Thank you, Chair Omari, and thank you, Provost, Vice Provost, and Professor. I wasn't going to say anything, but I just feel compelled to, and that is that after 8 years on the board, I am annually and more often than that struck by the consequential nature of what takes place today and at this meeting. And I'm particularly grateful for the way you've brought a holistic perspective today to what is involved in this process, the rigor that underpins all of it, and then bringing it to life with Professor Blank in terms of a more specific department look at it. So it is incredibly important what we're doing here. The rigor that leads to the quality that underpins the reputation and academic nature of this university is the very heart and soul of this. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. Regent Simonson?
Thank you, Chair Omari. I think you mentioned, Provost Hanson, about tenure really being about academic freedom. Do we have any, does the administration have policies on that? What's the breadth of academic freedom?
Chair Omari and Regent Simonson, yes, we do have policies on that, and it's about freedom of inquiry. That's the basic idea, that they were not to be constrained by political or other forces that would limit inquiry on the part of faculty members. So that's the basic notion.
Regent Powell?
Thanks, Chair Mark. So this question is sort of a more on the, as careers come to an end. And so I'm just wondering, and I don't really know how they, how you start to step down, over time as you come to the end of your career as a professor. I mean, certainly in the private sector, where, it's boom, it's, 65, it's mandatory retirement, it's that sort of thing. And I know that we're not operating in that world, but it would be very helpful if you could explain to me how careers, people become less productive, or they may decide, I just don't want to do this anymore, I want to move on to the next stage of my life. But so how that process typically would take place.
Provost Hanson?
Chair Omari and Regent Powell, this may be another, I can give some general indications of what happens here, and I was a department chair once too, but both of these folks can also speak from the point of view of department chairs. They're the ones who are often closest to that issue and can see if, they may be counseling faculty members who are thinking about, retiring or cutting back their activities. And they can help them shape the final stage of the career in an appropriate way. If the circumstance arises that someone's productivity is falling off in research and they're not thinking, well, I'm actually about to leave the field, but the department is thinking this is not performance at an acceptable level, it is the chair's responsibility to initiate discussions with the faculty member. And what usually happens is that in general, people want to do these jobs well, and they don't want to be remembered as not doing them well. So sometimes those discussions by themselves will initiate a change. In other cases, what might be appropriate, given what might be changes in, say, the landscape of funding opportunities in a given field, or the fact that the specialty that was once hot isn't hot anymore, people are sometimes moved into other areas to make a contribution, in the sense that they may be asked to do more teaching at a lower level, or they may be asked to take on different kinds of service responsibilities in the department to free up others who could contribute to the whole in a different sort of way. That's in general what's done, but I don't know if my colleagues who manage these, currently manage these things and who have also managed departments may want to add a few thoughts.
If there's anything in addition to add to what the provost just mentioned, please.
Sure, Chair Omari and Regent Powell. I can speak for my department, but that is a very common discussion at that point in a career. And this idea of we don't expect less than a portfolio of expectation that's 100% of the job. But we often start to talk about rebalancing that portfolio, which if it was very research heavy and that research activity, for example, has declined toward the end of a career, rebalancing that toward teaching or service responsibilities is a very common conversation to have.
Thank you. Vice Provost?
Just one quick comment, Chair Omari and Regent Powell, is that the policy with phased retirement is incredibly helpful in those conversations, because some people recognize that they're not doing what they had once done, and they don't necessarily want to anymore. But to provide people a way to stay connected while also decreasing their percentage appointment and percentage responsibility is very, very helpful in those conversations.
Great, thank you. Regent Shu, last question.
Thank you, Chair Omari. I'm not sure where to direct this to, but we used to talk a lot about field shaping researchers, and I haven't heard the word today, and we're talking about promoting people, and I'm just wondering, are we using a new term now, or did we kind of eliminate that from our vocabulary, or where are we going with that?
Provost Hanson?
Chair Omari and Regent Shu, I did use that term to describe David.
Great, we got one.
No, it is, and David, I think, there's a principle of transitivity here. One of the things he suggested is for the way in which they think about their hiring is that they're looking for people who will be field shapers.
But just follow up. Thank you, Chair. But I didn't hear it as part of the process is what I'm talking about in terms of how we evaluate people. And if we're, we used to talk about, attracting, retaining, field shaping researchers, and we have a whole committee that was supposed to be kind of involved in that. I'm not sure if they're in existence, but they're still on the web because I just looked at it. A lot of people are gone now from that committee, but, where are we going with
Chair Omari and Regent Shu, that's language from the strategic plan for the Twin Cities campus, and it came out of that committee's work. We see it operationalized in the promotion and tenure criteria that the departments have adopted. I do think they still think of this in the same way. The other is strat plan shorthand for the idea that one of the most important things we do to move the university forward is to hire faculty who will shape their fields.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you to the presenters, and I believe Provost Hanson and Vice Provost Ropers will remain with us for a little bit as we invite 4 members of our faculty up to the table for our second agenda item. And they will be, before we have them come up, though, I will entertain 3. Provost Hanson, would you like to introduce this next item for us?
Well, this continues the item that preceded it. It's the recommendation that you approve these candidates in the appropriate candidate categories. The regular faculty candidates for tenure and promotion is indicated, the contract faculty for promotion to the rank indicated, and the academic professional candidates to receive continuous appointments and promotions as indicated.
Thank you. Any discussion regarding the recommendation before us? Any discussion? Seeing none, I will entertain 3 separate motions. The first one, I'd entertain a motion that the regular faculty candidates on the list be approved for promotion and/or tenure as indicated.
I'll move it.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Are we going to have discussion on that? Were we supposed to have discussion ahead of the motion?
I asked for discussion, yes.
I was hoping we'd have discussion after the motion was moved and seconded, but
Okay.
if we're not going to do that, then.
I mean, I asked for discussion before we took the vote, or before I took the motion, actually. But we can, I don't know how we reverse that. Yeah, okay. We can't go back. I'd ask for a motion that the contract faculty candidates on the list be approved for promotion to the rank as indicated.
So moved.
Second. Discussion? Go for it.
Thank you. This was actually for this one anyway. So I noticed the medical school has a lot of people here. Most of them are in the contract realm. And I'm just kind of wondering, is that kind of standard that the medical school will always continue to have more contract faculty than tenure track? And is that kind of what we see going on in the future?
Chair Omari and Regent Shu, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Seeing none. All those, we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve the contract faculty candidates on the list for promotion to the rank as indicated. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I'd also entertain a motion that the academic professional candidates on the list receive continuous appointment and promotion as indicated.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Any questions? Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now we will introduce 4 faculty member who we just approved to move from assistant to associate professor rank, and they will each give a short presentation about their work, and then we'll have a short time for discussion. Provost Hanson, would you like to make some remarks?
Thank you, Chair Omari and members of the committee. It's my great pleasure to introduce some of these faculty who are newly happy in coming to the table. After you've conferred-
Congratulations.
Yes, conferred indefinite tenure and promotion on all of them. Each of them has, of course, a unique academic profile, and one of the things we wanted to do was highlight some of the differences that are appropriate to the colleges and the departments in which they work. Our first faculty member, Carrie Deutscher, is from the Department of Mechanical Engineering in the College of Science and Engineering. Dr. Deutscher's research focuses on the dynamics of complex fluids and multi-phase flows, with a special practical focus on environmental remediation. In 2016, she was awarded the prestigious National Science Foundation Career Award, and she's principal investigator on grants from the Department of Defense, the American Chemical Society, and the National Science Foundation. I'll introduce all of them and then kind of get out of the way. Professor Soumya Sen is in the Department of Information and Decision Sciences in the Carlson School of Management. His research focuses on how advances in information technology promise transformations of our society. But for those transformations to be optimal, he argues, we typically face an array of technical, economic, and social issues that must be holistically addressed. One particular area in which he's done pioneering work is connected with smart data pricing, which seeks ways to reduce internet congestion and realize affordable data plans for wider access. Professor Terry-Ann Williamson is in the Department of African American and African Studies in the College of Liberal Arts. Her research and teaching specialties include 20th and 21st century African American literature and Black cultural studies. Williamson's first book is entitled Scandalize My Name, Black Feminist Practice and the Making of Black Social Life. And in it, she uses her experiences growing up in the small Midwestern town of Peoria, Illinois, as a springboard for a study of how poor and working-class Black women circumvent stereotypes and construct alternative communal and kinship networks. She's currently working on a book entitled We Cannot Live Without Our Lives, a study of Black women and serial murder in the U.S. Professor Jason Wolf from the Department of Educational Psychology and the College of Education and Human Development studies how early intervention can dramatically improve outcomes for children with autism. Wolf's research addresses the issue through the prospective, longitudinal study of early behavioral and brain development. Currently, he's investigating precursors of repetitive and maladaptive sensory behaviors associated with autism, developing novel approaches to infant intervention, and refining methods to detect autism in infancy. Each of these faculty members went through a rigorous evaluation this year. Each excels in research, teaching, and service, and I would like to give you this opportunity to hear about their scholarship.
Welcome.
Thank you. Chair Omari, Board of Regents, I thank you for this chance to share. A major part of our research focus is on a class of materials called atmospheric aerosols, where atmospheric aerosols are suspensions of very tiny solid particles and liquid droplets suspended in the air around us, and they really are all around us. If I think about the air in this room, if I think about the air that I can cup in my hands, I mean, we think about the oxygen and nitrogen gas molecules, but in this small volume of space, there are hundreds of thousands or millions of solid particles and liquid droplets, very tiny material that nanometers in size that we cannot see, but they're there. And I'm assuming with that number that this is a relatively clean indoor air environment. The moment we walk outside, we expose ourselves to potentially orders of magnitude, thousands of times higher concentration of that particulate matter. that we're breathing in. It's impacting our health, it impacts our air quality. And what we look at with our research is that it impacts our climate. These aerosol particles, they impact our climate because they're there. They're reflecting and absorbing solar radiation in very different ways than the gas molecules in the atmosphere. But they also impact our climate, and this is less intuitive, because they're seeding clouds. It's every cloud droplet has an aerosol particle inside of it that it came from. If the conditions of the particle is right, if the relative humidity is right, it will rapidly take up water from the gas phase and form that cloud droplet. So aerosols impact our climate, but when it comes to climate modeling and calculating radiative force balance on our atmosphere, it's the aerosol effect that's the largest source of uncertainty in that modeling, in part because these aerosols are complex, multi-phase system involved in meteorological scale events, but they're involved in them in a way that's richly informed by the molecular level composition of the individual aerosol particle. So that's what we look at in our research is the individual aerosol particles, what they're made of, how big they are, how they evolve in time. And we use statistical thermodynamic modeling to get at these properties to predict what the chemical composition is over time. And then we complement that with measurements where we design and engineer small lab-on-a-chip devices, these microfluidic devices where you can inject small samples into them and then make measurements. And we've used that in our group to track a particular class of aerosols, but we've also, with these tools, been able to actively participate in collaborations with aerosol scientists and atmospheric scientists around the world to answer just bigger climate level questions. And then one final comment, these platforms have also enabled us to answer some basic science questions about complex chemical systems and just put us in whole new areas of research, largely in partnership with the strong local and regional industries in this area. So we've been able to look at beyond aerosols, emulsions, and sprays and filtration. So I'm very excited about the work we've done and the work that we're moving into. And again, I thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Professor Sin?
Chair Omari, Board of Regents, thank you very much for this opportunity to share my research and talk about what inspires it. Let me begin by posing a question. Which technology, in your opinion, has had the greatest impact on our lives and will continue to have well into the future? This was a question I asked my grandmother, and she answered automobiles, a symbol of modernization, of industrialization of our times, and the freedom to go anywhere. But you see, she was born in colonial British India, where very few could dream of freedom, let alone the affluence to own a motor vehicle, and she never got to own one. I'd asked this question to my father, and he responded, being from a different generation, electronics. He was thinking of gadgets, of colored television, of cameras, phones, computers. But he lived and grew up in a state of India called Bengal, which was ruled by the Communist Party, where these items were luxuries that families couldn't afford. As a child, I didn't have a color television or a computer or video games or even a bike. So you can imagine how interesting my childhood was and what turned me to books. But my father, being a chemistry professor, used to entertain me with little experiments at home with his chemistry toolbox that generated interest in science. And so when it was my turn to answer that same question as a career choice of a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, my answer was information technology. I think information technology has had a profound impact on my generation, in our lifetime, and is going to have an impact in many decades to come. Information technology, unlike cars and automobiles, which really were status symbols at some time, was always, from the very beginning, a great leveler of the playing field, a conduit for flow of information, a force to democratize knowledge. And it is arguably the driving force in connecting people all over the world. As I travel to India, to Africa, to Southeast Asia, I see young kids watching the video lectures by some of the most famous faculties in the US by connecting over the internet. I see small business owners being able to sell their products and produce to international buyers over the internet. I see families, including mine, being able to connect with relatives abroad so much more easily than the days of telegram and telephone networks. And this is undoubtedly a progress that we should be proud of. But there are also dark clouds gathering in the horizon. These include the issues of security and privacy, growing digital divide, and the impact of IT-enabled automation on our workforce. As a researcher, I try to address these issues and find solutions to these problems in an interdisciplinary framework by bringing in concepts from economics and technology. Let me talk about one of these aspects very quickly, the affordable internet to bridge the digital divide. A couple of years back, I got to start working with some of the leading telecommunication companies in the US, including AT&T and Comcast. In every other business that I have walked into, the managers typically ask, how can I increase the demand for my service among my customers? At AT&T, they seem to be asking, how can I throttle data? How can I penalize the demand from my customers because I don't want them to use so much of my network? And that sounded very strange to me because I knew that they could do better. And so I worked with them to create a new kind of mobile pricing system and incentive schemes for users to use less during the congested times. And we experimented with AT&T users to demonstrate that we can create a win-win for both customers and the network operators, even in presence of bandwidth and spectrum crunch. This work later grew into the area of within an area of network economics into something called smart data pricing, which Provost Hansen mentioned. At present, I'm doing experiments to design advertisement-sponsored data plans that will make broadband access more affordable to users. I think it is important to keep broadband access affordable for everyone, especially with the rise of AI-based automation. It will be necessary to deliver knowledge and of information technology to train the workforce over the internet. And I'm very thankful to the university and the Carlson School of Management for providing me the opportunity to conduct such interdisciplinary research in economics and technology. Thank you very much for taking the time today to listen to my story.
Thank you, Professor Sin. Next up, we have Professor Williamson.
Thank you, Provost Hansen, Chair Omari, and the board. I usually work by telling stories, so I'll tell you a little bit of one now. In mid-2003, I was a law student at the University of Illinois when Black women began turning up dead and going missing in my hometown of Peoria, Illinois, a city of approximately 115,000 that is located about 90 miles west of Champaign-Urbana. Peoria is probably most well known for being, until very recently, the headquarters of Caterpillar, the Fortune 500 company and construction equipment manufacturer that employs or supports the employment of a large percentage of Peoria's residents, including my own mother and two of my sisters. Some people will also know Peoria as the hometown of the feminist icon Betty Friedan, the Golden State Warrior Shaun Livingston, and most significantly to my way of thinking, the preeminent comedian and cultural critic Richard Pryor. Despite its early years as a rip-roaring river city that is said to have once boasted the largest numbers of distilleries in the world, Peoria has worked hard to cultivate and sustain an image of itself as the consummate American city, a place where wholesome Midwestern values govern its citizens, and how it plays in Peoria continues to be a measure of mainstream acceptance and success. Indeed, Peoria was awarded the All-America City Award, which recognizes, quote, communities that leverage civic engagement, collaboration, inclusiveness, and innovation, end quote, by the National Civic League for the fourth time in 2013. Yet just 3 years later, in 2016, Peoria was named by the financial news site 24/7 Wall Street first on its annual list of the worst cities for Black Americans, a list that is based primarily on disparities between white and Black residents, and which Peoria has managed to land on every single year since the list first began being published in 2015. And I also note that the Twin Cities has also appeared on multiple times. This discrepancy between Peoria's image and the way Black people experience Peoria is certainly not a phenomenon that is exclusive to my hometown, but it is central to my personal and professional lives and provides some insight to just how deeply entwined the personal and professional are for me, a Black woman who was a first-generation college student who hails from the poorest and most under-resourced community in what was once called the single worst city to be a Black American. By the time I began graduate school in 2005, 9 similarly situated Black women had been killed or disappeared in Peoria over a 15-month span. I knew one of these women. Her name was Tammy Walls, personally. Our families had attended the same church, and she and I had both sung alto in the young adult choir during my high school years. The deaths of Tammy and the other women, almost all of whom had lived in and around the same neighborhoods where I spent my childhood and adolescence, is what spurred my current research project, a study of Black women and girls who have been the victims of serial murder throughout the United States. It turns out that what happened in my hometown was not the anomaly I originally believed it to be, that in fact, what I have learned via my research over the past 10 plus years is that more than 550 Black women and girls have died at the hands of serial murderers since just the mid-1970s. And in the past 20 years, a disproportionate number of these murders have occurred in Midwestern industrial cities like St. Louis, East St. Louis, Chicago, Kansas City, Detroit, Cleveland, and Gary, in addition to my own Peoria. Consequently, in addition to currently working on my second book project, We Cannot Live Without Our Lives, Black Women and the Serialization of Black Death, I am also the founding director of the Black Midwest Initiative, a collective of faculty, students, artists, organizers, and community-involved people whose work within and beyond the university engages the lives of people of African descent living within the greater Midwest and Rust Belt regions of the United States. As a group, we are committed to telling the heartland stories that too often are erased or rendered invisible in the public record, and using our collective work as the catalyst for systemic social change. I would like to end by saying that I owe a huge debt to Black Studies. As a sophomore at the University of Illinois at Chicago, I took my first course in African American history, and it fundamentally changed my life. That course and those that follow gave me a language for understanding and conceptualizing the conditions of my own life and the conditions of Black people and other marginalized populations more generally. As my colleague, Dr. John Wright, attested to before this body recently, Black people have often had a very fraught relationship with the university, and my very presence here today is a testament to the sustained struggles of many people who came before me. As thankful as I am to the university for my career, I am even more thankful to the communities of people who have mostly not had access to these spaces, but who have held me up, and in so doing have held my work accountable.
Thank you, Professor Williamson. Professor Wolf.
Thank you, Chairman Omari and Board of Regents. My work is focused on understanding how autism develops very early in life. We use both brain imaging and behavioral methods to watch as autism unfolds. We can't currently diagnose children with autism usually prior to age 2. And so we want to understand, what does autism look like before it is fully emergent? The unfortunate reality is that in practice, most children with autism don't receive a diagnosis until after age 4. In Minnesota, that number is closer to age 5. What that means is that those children are missing out on an important number of years where early intervention would make the most difference. And this is critical. These children with autism grow up into be adults with autism. It's estimated that autism costs the United States upwards of $1 trillion and exceeding that amount by 2025. There are more people with autism in the state of Minnesota than there are residents of St. Cloud, and that number is not expected to diminish. I'm fortunate to work with colleagues from across the university. This is an interdisciplinary effort, as well as colleagues from 8 other universities in North America. Right now, we've developed and are currently refining a method to identify using MRI autism at around age 6 months. As it looks so far, this method is far superior to any currently available technology and has the promise of saving not only money, but really impacting these children's trajectories, making the difference between a child with autism who can't talk and a child with autism who can. Also, of course, easing some of the burden on families who they're living with their child, their life. They love their child, but they're worried about their child, and they want to see their child thrive as much as possible. And those early years are probably our best opportunity to do that. So in conjunction with our developing brain imaging methods to identify these children, we're also now at Minnesota with my colleagues Jed Elison and Suma Jacob developing methods that are more population-based, where we're using complex paradigms to use behavioral markers to identify clusters of risk that would have potentially far-reaching effects, and we've just began that project. Also in tandem with that, we're working to develop with colleagues in the Institute for Community Integration new methods of infant intervention that could be delivered remotely to families that may not have access to services using telehealth. We're just in the beginning phases of this, but we see this as an exciting way of answering the question of, if we can identify infants with autism, what can we do about it? And so that's another arm of the research that I'm involved in. So thank you for this opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you to all four of you, and once again, you all have been through a very rigorous process that we just heard about. I'd like to congratulate you all again for moving from assistant to associate professor, and I will start a round of applause. So, members of the committee, we do have about 15 minutes for discussion and questions, which I will actually kick off. I heard the provost give a nod to things other than research, such as, and I'll specifically pick out teaching. And I'd like to, however many of you would be interested in answering this, I'm curious to know from the dossiers that you all had to prepare, what's in there about either graduate student advising and the feedback that you get from your roles as appropriate for those of you who do that or are on dissertation committees, and then the role of teaching and how that's incorporated into the dossiers. I think that's something that we haven't heard a lot about from the previous presentation. So whomever would be interested in cracking on that.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Omari. I guess I will address that. I don't know what others' experience is, but each year that we went through the tenure process, we had to provide evidence that we were on track for teaching. This included essentially what amounts to a teaching philosophy, the ways in which we provided innovation in the classroom, as well as evidence that our teaching was actually effective in terms of yearly or class-by-class reports from the students themselves. We had peer reviews of teaching. And then there, of course, was some qualitative evidence provided by the students when they give feedback in the classes. And I think, too, that there were many opportunities to speak to teaching more broadly defined. For instance, how we've developed or improved classes, how we mentor the students below us and or that work with us, and what are some indicators of their success. For example, if I'm mentoring a student, are they presenting at conferences? Are they themselves reaching the milestones that they need to? So that sort of broadly defined teaching and mentorship, I think, was reflected annually, and then, of course, in the final report that went forward for the tenure review.
Great, thank you.
I'd also add, like, besides the same process that is followed at Carlson, we have been looking at ways to create online programs and online courses. And I started developing the first online course for the Carlson School, and now we have a full-time online MBA program that is being launched. So innovation in terms of both the content and making it relevant to the times, especially when it comes to topics such as technology and business, is something that the school looks at. And as well as innovation in terms of the ways to deliver it, such as online programs, online courses. And one of the other things that I have done is to start a new program of taking our undergraduate student to China in Hong Kong and Shenzhen to see it's a course on IT entrepreneurship. So for them to see what IT entrepreneurs go through, the entire supply chain in Shenzhen and how they procure components and actually make devices. And to have them inspired to come back to the US and do something similar, to actually become entrepreneurs and give that motivation. I can't say whether that is expected all the time, but I definitely think that the Carlson School has been very supportive of that.
Excellent. Thank you both. And I really made a point to bring that up because we should always be keeping in mind that, in my opinion, above everything else that our faculty do, they're teaching our students. And that's why we're here. If we're not doing that and we're not doing it well, then I don't think we're doing our job. So thank you for answering that. Regent Powell.
Thanks, Chair Omari, and thanks to all of you. We are very grateful for your being here, and congratulations on your appointment today. So my question has to do with, not sure how to ask it, sort of collaboration. So, for example, I think Professor Wolf, autism, which I'm sure is an interest and a passion of yours, but you talked a lot about imaging capability, and it occurred to me that University of Minnesota is probably a global center for imaging research and capability. So I guess the question is, how important are these related capabilities and opportunities to whoever wants to answer it as you think about your research and where you want to do it. I'm guessing, it may not be correct, that the imaging capability of University of Minnesota is key for your research.
Yes, thank you, Chair Omari and Regent Powell. So, of course, imaging at Minnesota, for those of you who aren't aware, is top of the line, worldwide respected as one of the top imaging centers. We just started 2 grants funded by the NIH. I think both were awarded in February and then March. They're getting underway soon, and both of them include the CMRR as a center for imaging, where we will be scanning babies and toddlers who are at risk, as well as control children. Part of that is part of a large network that's an Autism Center of Excellence network, of which Minnesota is one of 5 sites nationwide where we're scanning babies at risk. The other project is we're only focusing on Minnesota, and this is run locally at U of M, where we're scanning children to verify that our protocol for identifying children is valid and accurate. So it's absolutely necessary to work with colleagues in CMRR and for folks like myself to be able to have crosstalk between folks who think about the behavior of autism and think about neuroradiology, for example. That said, it takes a village to pull off this sort of work. So, for example, we work with colleagues at the University of North Carolina who have developed a very specialized expertise in how to analyze the infant brain. And so, combined with our imaging capability here and the sort of protocols they developed there, we can pull off far more than we could do by ourselves.
Thank you. All right, Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair Omari. I really don't have a question. I just have an observation. I was so impressed with all of your comments and presentations that I've been spending a lot of time at the legislature lately, and I would love it if someday a presentation like this could happen for legislators. It's why we do what we do, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Regent Lucas. Regent Anderson?
Thank you, Chair Omari. Very, very briefly, again, I liked all these. I couldn't pass this up. I said that everything I think of goes to the least common denominator. The dossiers for tenure track, for me, it's like the first time I've heard the word dossier without hearing the word no collusion, no obstruction at the same time. But I do have a question for the young lady with the air. So I come down here and I stay at the Commons Hotel. Is the lobby, the cup full of air in that lobby today, is that different than the cup full of air that's in this room? Would you find significant differences, or do the heating systems and the cooling systems as compared to what we find outside in the park here and over at the practice football stadium?
Mm-hmm. Chair Omari, Regent Anderson, thank you for your question. So yes, they would definitely be different, but in general, indoor air has a very different quality and characteristics than outdoor air. So those are pretty different fields of study, actually. But then outdoor air, I mean, it depends on if you're over an ocean, if you're over an industrial area, over an area with a lot of forest. And then really where there's a lot of questions is what happens when you're in the coast or when you're between these two regions as well. And then what the conditions are, the temperature, the relative humidity, like you mentioned, the HVAC systems.
And do like jet streams and that, you know, like we talk about where mercury is present in the air is not always where it's disseminated, it's carried. Is that, you find that too in?
Absolutely. I mean, so this particular will travel across oceans, we get it from different continents, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I think all of what you guys are doing is fascinating. It's great.
Great. Thank you to the presenters, to the members. Once again, congratulations. Next up, members, we have a large discussion which potentially could lead into other ones about transfer students at the university. This is solely a discussion item, and I imagine it would be a robust discussion. So I'd invite Vice Provost McMaster, Associate Vice Provost Lindgren Clark, and Associate Vice Provost Van Voorhees to the table. Welcome to the presenters, and I'll turn to Provost Hanson for opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair Omari. We've discussed transfer students with the board on several occasions, and the transfer student experience is very important as we talk about student success at the University of Minnesota. Because on the Twin Cities campus in particular, approximately 35% of our students arrive through transfer from another institution. That's nearly 3,000 students each year. A high percentage arrive from our Minnesota State campuses. Some come from the private colleges, the Wisconsin system, from elsewhere in the U.S. We also have international transfer students. Within our peer group of institutions, our percentage of transfer students is near the top. I mean, we are distinctive in that way. That reflects some important features of the higher education ecosystem within the state of Minnesota. And these features are relevant to the policy questions you're going to take up today. Our state has two major public systems, of course, and Minnesota State now provides a high number of transfers from the two-year colleges. But as Minnesota State enrollments have declined, applications to the University of Minnesota system have simultaneously declined. At the same time, Minnesota State has become more intentional about creating pathways from their two-year system to their four-year campuses, retaining more students within their system. We've basically not had an affirmative effort to recruit transfer students beyond Minnesota, and national applications from transfer students have also been declining. Thus, the University of Minnesota might need to consider a national recruitment effort for transfer students. Currently, we only recruit nationally for new high school students, that is, students who are just graduating from high school. But if the ecosystem is changing in Minnesota because of Minnesota State's strategy, new recruiting strategies might be necessary for the University of Minnesota. In any case, it's something that has to be considered. You could take a number of directions from these facts. I also want to note that we've been making vigorous efforts to acquire and analyze data on the success of transfer students. As you'll shortly see, we now have significantly more detailed information on how well transfer students are performing as they arrive from a variety of sending institutions and how well they're doing in an array of majors. These data will enable us to identify the resources required to ensure success as students arrive on our campuses. And here there is actually a little bit of bad news. The CERU data, the student experience at research universities, suggests that on balance, transfer students do not have experiences that are as positive as those of students who arrive as freshmen. We're working to see how we can improve their experience through advising, career counseling, curricular adjustments, enhanced housing, co-curricular experiences, in order to make certain that all our students are enjoying a high-quality experience and succeeding on our campuses. The Office of Undergraduate Education, the Office of Student Affairs, and other units have been working to identify the impediments that transfer students experience and to create enhanced opportunities for them, improving orientation, setting up a transfer student board, and so on, giving a lot more attention directly to the transfer students and to their experiences. And their life experiences are often somewhat different, too. I mean, it's a much more complicated issue because there are a number of ecosystems that are intersecting here. All of these issues are relevant to the development of a comprehensive enrollment strategy. Given changes in the pools of possible transfers, is it time for the university to revisit the balance of freshmen and transfers on our campuses? There's tremendous pressure for admission to the Twin Cities campus at the freshman level and declining pressure for access from transfer students. But on the other hand, transfer affords students a second chance. An appropriate pipeline construction can enhance diversity and respond to changing geodemographics. So there are a number of desiderata that are in play here. Today, Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Education, Bob McMaster, Beth Lindgren-Clark, Associate Vice Provost for Strategic Enrollment Strategies, and Sue Van Voorhees, Associate Vice Provost for Academic Support Resources, will provide a comprehensive update on the current state of transfer students.
Thank you. Who's going to start? Please, Vice Provost.
Yes, Chair Omari and members of the committee. And
First of all, thank you, Provost Hanson, for teeing that up and bringing forward some of the major topics that we'd like to tackle today. In particular, at some point in time, it might be interesting to have a conversation around the balance among our students on our campuses. An overview of the presentation is here. We're going to talk about who are transfer students, where do they come from, how prepared are they. Second of all, we're going to talk about the systems that we've developed to streamline the transfer process. We'll come back to that also in the June presentation around system transfer credit, and then how do we support transfer students. So to begin the conversation, we actually have 3 different types of transfer students that we need to identify. The first type are called NAS. Those are the kinds of students you traditionally think of as transfers. They're coming from outside the university system and outside the university. Moving forward in this conversation, I will use NAS for that. The second flavor of transfer students type are called intra-university transfers, IUTs. These are students that are coming from or migrating among the system campuses. And we actually have a migration matrix we'll show you later that indicates the paths between and among our institutions. Then finally, a bit of a different kind of transfer are called ICTs, intra-campus transfers, because on each of our campuses, we have a tremendous migration going on, again, between and among our colleges. We'll see students come into science and engineering, and after a year or two, decide that their path is better off in CLA or CFANS. And in fact, the next slide is the only slide that we have on ICTs. Every year, we like to look at the migration of our students around the campus. What this shows, for instance, for just 1 year, for NAS, these are only NAS students, ICT students, is that CLA, if we go to the CLA column, for CLA, 104 students transferred from CLA to CSOM, 251 transferred to the College of Education and Human Development, 53 to design, and so on. If we look for science and engineering, that row, the receiving row, they received 2 students from Carlson, 13 from CBS, and 179 from CLA. Well, more than an interest in the numbers in the matrix, this has some major implications for student success, curricular design, and advising. Because when a student does cross one of these boundaries, it's likely that they will have to, in some way, reset their curricular expectations. And the idea is to try to, in these migrations, make sure that we minimize that. There's a whole array of transfer student success outcomes and initiatives, and throughout this presentation, we'll touch on some of these, certainly not all of these. But in addition to kind of a chronological list, and 3 of them that I'll mention are enhanced transfer welcome days, that is, including transfers more in orientation, and in fact, last year in the welcome week and the creation of the M on the football field, expanding the U of M Promise program to include transfers. Transfer students get 2 years of Promise, freshmen get 4 years of Promise. And also, we've created each year an all-campus transfer summit where we bring together all the players on our campus to talk about initiatives and strategies. One can also notice, when we get into this later, the success trends off to the right, the curves, and we measure this very carefully. The next slide shows that we actually have different ways of admitting transfer students within our campus, the Twin Cities campus. Basically, all the applications are processed by undergraduate admissions, and then undergraduate admissions makes the decisions on transfers for 2 colleges. We make the decisions for the College of Liberal Arts and the College of Biological Sciences. For the rest of the colleges, admissions does the processing, but then the colleges themselves make the decision on who gets admitted to that college.
And so there are really two different ways that transfers get admitted. And then the decisions, all the decisions go back into admissions where the letters go out. The provost and I have had some conversations over the years about whether it would be better to have all transfer decisions maintained within undergraduate admissions, and we've toed and froed on that. But that certainly is something on the table.
As you may be aware, we use the Student Experience in a Research University, or the SERU. We've been using that since 2010 to gain a better understanding and insight into student experiences. And as Provost Hanson alluded to, oftentimes when we compare transfer students to their NHS peers, they're more likely to spend time working, and in particular, they work more off campus. They're more likely to be academically involved and really show initiative with professors and in coursework, and they're also worried about a lot of financial things. So paying for college, maybe skipping meals to pay for things, and personal debt. They are unfortunately less satisfied with their overall experience here at the university. They're less satisfied with course access as it relates to their particular majors. They're less satisfied with the clarity of program requirements. And so if time allows, we'll show a little bit more from the SERU data. When we're really trying to work and enhance the transfer student experience, we leverage this framework, the transfer student experience framework, which has 3 major stages of the work. And so the goal here of these stages is to identify critical services and support and interventions for transfer student success. So you can see here that stage 1 is all about preparation for transfer. And this includes things, we want them to be successful in their endeavors here at the university. And this includes things like helping them understand the process and policies, including transferring of credit. And these departments include folks like admissions, some of the collegiate contacts, one-stop, and housing early on. The second stage is really about the admitted and the confirmed students, where we want to provide intentional outreach to students so they do have that healthy academic and social transition. And as you may imagine, that includes things like orientation, Welcome Week, Multicultural Center for Academic Excellence, housing, among other things. And then the final stage, which is a very large stage, is the progression to graduation. And this is everything that we can do to support students while they're here, maximizing their learning and development, and achieving a timely graduation. And this includes many areas of the student experience, from learning support, advising, student engagement, career support, learning abroad, and on and on. In 2013, the Office of Undergraduate Education created a central position to coordinate the transfer student experience, and this position leads the university through a lot of this framework and having those conversations on ways that we can continue to improve and enhance students' experiences. So with that coordination for the last 6 years, we've really been able to do a lot of different programmatic efforts for students. We have many communication strategies, monthly newsletters, social media, websites, the first 6 weeks events calendar, and so on. We have a lot of programming efforts. We have a living learning community for transfer students. We, of course, have orientation and Welcome Week that's been mentioned. We have areas for transfer students to stay involved and kind of maintain their transfer student identity while they're here. The University Transfer Student Board, which is a student organization that plans events and hosts workshops for transfer students. We have a National Tau Sigma Honor Society, in which we've inducted over 800 transfer students for their academic achievements. And finally, last year, we implemented a transfer advocate training to train faculty and staff so they can better advocate and understand our transfer students. And thus far, we have trained 96 folks through 2 programs, and we hope to continue that. So in addition to a lot of programming that's happening, we have many tools and software that can support our students as well.
So I'm going to touch on some of the systems that aid our transfer students behind the scenes to really help them navigate their program of study. It is complex behind the scenes. However, it's important to know how your courses are going to transfer to the institution. So in 2018, we actually implemented the transfer evaluation system, which we call TESS. So a student can actually check to see if their course is going to be accepted through transferology, and if not, they can go ahead and submit that, and our Office of Admissions will evaluate that course, and then through a workflow process, it will be sent then to the faculty department to determine whether or not it's a direct articulation. From that, then, that information is entered into one database. Previous to that, each department had several different types of databases or systems, and so they'd have to repeat that over and over again. Now that all that information is in one system, we are able to provide that information to many students because it only needs to be articulated once. So then a student can determine whether or not a course is going to transfer to our institution from any of our system campuses, as well as the greater Minnesota schools, or anyone that is using this particular system. This data then actually feeds to a system called Transferology and our degree audit system. And from that then, with our Transferology system, we actually can take a look. Any student across the state can look and see how their courses will transfer. We implemented Transferology in a partnership with Minnesota State Schools, and any private school can also use this system. Several of them within the state of Minnesota use this system as well. So what this system does is really says, we want to answer your questions on how your courses will transfer and will they transfer. So students can see these articulations, again, between our system campuses, as well as any Minnesota State school or any school that actually uses this system. And as you can see, there are about 7,500 students in just the past year that have gone to the Transferology system through our admissions link. But even more so, we've had 27,000 searches through the replacement course feature in just that past year alone. So for example, students looking to see how their courses are going to transfer into the institution use that system. Students on our campus can actually look to see if a course will transfer if they go home for the summer, or if they go to St. Cloud State or to University of Minnesota Duluth. They can see then if that course will transfer and actually meet a degree requirement. And even our PSEO students or any PSEO student can use this system to ensure that their courses will transfer to any institution of their interest. And probably some parents have actually created accounts to use this tool as well. I know I did, as well as many of the people I know, because I try and get this system out to as many people as possible. This system was actually implemented in 2014, and it's been a great partnership with Minnesota State. The other thing with Transferology is a student can run a degree audit. And this is our transfer articulation and degree audit tool, and is currently going through an upgrade. We're calling that project Ta-Da. So it's actually a system called UAchieve that we use, but on our campus we call it APASS. And many students run APASS reports each year. We run over 1 million APASS reports across the University of Minnesota. Now, by upgrading this system, actually, students that are transferring into the University of Minnesota, we will be able to now, with this upgrade, provide the data to our PeopleSoft system or our registration system, and students will no longer have to run around to get a permission number to register for a course that requires a prerequisite, because that information will now be sent over to our PeopleSoft system. So that will be terrific in the next year as we continue to upgrade that system. This particular tool has also given us a lot of information regarding degree progress. And so students have information where they're at as far as their degree, as well as the advisor. The other thing we have been able to do with data from this particular tool is create dashboards for the colleges to take a look at degree progress within their colleges and determine if changes need to be made or how can we work with students to ensure that they are making progress towards degree. And then finally, the best thing I think with this particular tool now is students no longer have to apply to graduate, because we know when a student has completed their requirements and we actually can send them congratulations, here is information on commencement, we see that you'll be graduating this spring. So that saves them a lot of time as well. Transfer students have an accurate picture then of what is required of them when they come to the University of Minnesota with this particular tool. So if you combine all of these software packages together, it's pretty awesome for the student. But as a student, you have all that information available at your fingertips. And these systems actually provide us more information on our transfer students as well. So we can see if a student is off track in their program, and an advisor can work with them, and we can look at curricular barriers for students. A little bit on the cost benefit with all of these tools together. It's about $896,000 a year for staff and the software support behind the tool. But if you calculate just the degree audits alone, and as of Monday, we've actually run 1.147 million audits this past year. That's about 78 cents per audit alone, which I think is a really good a good return on investment. And that doesn't even figure in the time savings for students, advisors, getting rid of systems out in the colleges they no longer have to maintain. So it's a really good ROI, if you ask me. Not only that, but it provides really great information for the students on campus to really figure out how they can navigate their degree program. So all of these systems tied together provide that transfer experience that we want as far as navigating the degree program. And the other thing, feeding the transferology system, the benefits go way beyond the University of Minnesota students. Students can run an APAS, and look how their courses will be transferred. I wish I could broadcast transferology across the state, but putting all of these systems together, really we want that welcoming environment as far as navigating their degree. With that, I'll turn it over to Vice Provost McMaster.
Great. So we'll spend the next few minutes quickly going through some of the enrollment trends and profiles of the transfer class. This slide is for NAS, and in a similar way to similar method to what we show you each fall for the freshman class. These are the major statistics for the transfer class. This is fall 18, where we enrolled about 2,078 students. You can see the gender balance actually with transfer students is much more equal than it is with freshmen. Students of color at 28%. Minnesota residents, a higher percent at around 69, approaching 70. Lower numbers of reciprocity students. And what we see in terms of credits are that most of the students arrive with approximately 60 credits as you would expect 2 years of college work. Next slide. This is the same set of statistics for the IUTs, the inter-university transfers. And again, the only thing to point out here, I think, is the gender balance where 58% of IUTs are women and 41% are men. We also see a very high percentage of Minnesota residents. If we look at the enrollment trends over time for transfers, this particular slide shows both fall and spring admits. So I need to identify what happens in the spring. In the spring, we actually bring in a fairly large number of transfer students. The target is normally around 650. In the fall, the target has been around 2,200. We bring in very, very few freshmen in the spring. So really, the majority of students enrolling in the spring are transfer students. As you look at these trends over time, you can see that over the last 3 years, there's a bit of a downward trend with overall transfer enrollment. You can also see the peak that occurred in 2008-9. That was a post-recession year where in particular the College of Liberal Arts, for budgetary reasons, enrolled a large number of transfer students. And that number has dipped down since then. Next slide simply shows the same trend for IUTs. You're going to see more variability with IUTs among the system simply because that's a significantly smaller number. Next slide shows the IUT and NAS by academic year, so it's adding the two together. And again, I think the point here is the downward trend in the joint number over the last few years, and we're going to talk a bit more about that shortly. I also, we felt that it was important to include the system campus, Greater Minnesota campus data here. So very quickly, these are the Crookston data. They enrolled 422 IUTs and NASs last fall. Duluth enrolled 567. You can see the trend there. Morris enrolled 91. And Rochester, which enrolls very few transfer students because of the nature of their curriculum, enrolled about 40. So Provost Hanson talked about the high percentage of transfer students among all of our students. And in fact, this slide shows for both NAS and IUT, the percentage of those students compared to the total. So the number we normally use is approximately 35%, a very high percentage of our students enter this university as transfers. You can see that number's been as high as 41%. That was that post-recession year. But we have a basic target, if you like, based on the enrollment numbers of about 35% on the Twin Cities campus. If we compare ourselves with our peers, what we see here, and we have to use only fall data with this slide because we can't get the spring transfer data from iPads. We can see that, sure enough, we're at the high end of our peer group. In fact, if you look at the numbers here within the Big Ten, we currently sit at third place with 28% in the fall. You can also see some of the other institutions and their low numbers. Michigan at 14% transfer, Indiana at 9%, Wisconsin enrolls only 50% of the transfers that we do. I think it's very interesting also if you look at this graph, and I just caught this morning, I should have caught it a long time ago, is that if you look at that cliff between Ohio State and Iowa, what this really represents are the urban campuses and the kind of rural greater state campuses. So there's definitely an urban effect in terms of transfers here. Next slide. If we look at the number of transfers enrolled at a number of institutions in the upper Middle West, you can see that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities by far and above has the largest number for this particular year, 2459. But you can also see Iowa State is or has a significant number of transfer students at 1726. Not surprisingly, within the Minnesota state system, both St. Cloud and Mankato have the largest enrollments of transfer students. I'm sure you figured this out, but the privates are in blue. The state universities are in maroon, and then University of Minnesota campus is in yellow on this slide. We also look at the percent students of color in the transfer class, and this particular slide shows that, and it looks very much like the freshman slide. We enroll 26% students of color in the transfer class, which again is at the higher end of the curve as we look at our peers. The next slide shows for the three primary types of students where we measure students of color: NHS high school in maroon, NAS transfers in yellow, IUT system transfers in blue, that for each of these curves, the percent and number of students of color has been going up over time. We like to look at previous institutions to get a sense of where our students are coming from, transfer students. And this, in a similar way to the ICT matrix, is a transfer matrix among our system. You can see that transfer to the UMTC campus is found in the second to the last column here, where the Twin Cities received 18 students from Crookston in this year, 213 from Duluth, 56 from Morris, and 25 from Rochester. 27 students transferred from the Twin Cities to Crookston and 32 to Duluth. In total, 396 students transferred among our campuses. That's actually a pretty small number if you think of the fact we have 45,000 students, undergraduates on our campuses. So there's not a lot of migration going on. Surprisingly, we included a map in our data set, and this particular one depicts the geographic location of our transfer students. No big surprises here, although if you look at the West Coast, we receive a much higher number of transfer students from Washington State than one would expect. There's some reasons for that. California is quite high, and then the population centers of Texas, Florida, New York all send us, and Illinois all send us large numbers. So this is basically the kind of geographic distribution of our transfer students.
The next slide, which you see on a yearly basis, is the pie graph showing the primary sectors that our students are coming from, transfer students. What's critical here is to note that the Minnesota State two-year colleges, which provide 34% of our transfers in this year, and Minnesota State four-year colleges, which provide 5%, yield about 49 or 40%, 39, 40% of our transfers. That number has actually been, or percent has been going down over time. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, we were receiving 45%, 44, 45% of our transfers from Min-State. So there's been a shift here. You can see the yellow pie sector at the bottom, system campuses. That number has been pretty consistent at 10% of the overall transfer student body. And then finally, you can see here the top sending institutions. This particular chart doesn't change much year from year. The top two continue to be both Normandale and University of Minnesota Duluth. Most of the top 10 come from community colleges in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. There's a real odd one here in 10th place with the Shandong University of Finance and Economics that sends a fairly large number of students to Carlson. If we look at this particular slide, this is the troubling slide that Provost Hansen referred to. So we have seen a fairly steady downtick in applications, transfer applications, over the last 6 to 7 years. And my admissions director, Heidi Meyer, has confirmed that this is a national trend, a downtick in transfer admissions, applications, which then enters into a conversation about our aggregate enrollment management strategy. This slide I'd like to spend just a moment on because we get asked frequently about those students who apply to the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and don't come. So what we see here is that 33% of the 2078 fall 2018 entering transfer students had previously applied for freshman admission to the Twin Cities, so about a third. Of those NAS who previously applied for freshman admission, 30% of those were accepted, but chose to enroll at another institution, probably because of financial reasons. We don't know. That's a pretty good hypothesis. Of those NAS who applied for freshman admission and were denied, the most commonly attended institution was Normandale Community College, perhaps not surprisingly. So on the right-hand side, you can see kind of the distribution of where these students went. So it gets into the second chance we talk about. If you are not accepted at one of our campuses the first time around and you go to a community college, you can often re-enter this institution as a transfer. And in fact, you've saved some significant tuition money over that first 2 years. Quickly, some outcome data. We report to you the retention rates and graduation rates for transfer students each year. This is the first year retention rate, and we have noted, now remember, there's actually not that major variation among the bars here, but we have noticed a downtick with first year retention over the last few years. Next slide shows for IUTs the 3-year graduation rate, which is at about 68%. That's higher than the NAS 3-year graduation rate. The next slide shows the 3-year graduation rate for NAS. This is one of the board metrics. You look at this, your expectations were going to be at 65%. We came very close to 65% 2 years ago, and then we did see a slight downtick. The next slide shows the 4-year graduation rates for NAS. For transfer students, we look at both the 3-year and the 4-year rates. The next set of slides are pretty interesting, and they depict analysis from a new transfer data set that's been developed over the past 2 years by Peter Radcliffe and John Kellogg.
The basic question we asked several years ago of our analysts is, we wanted to know how students were performing from the primary sending institutions and in certain majors. We wanted to be able to drill down below the aggregate statistics you've just been looking at. So these slides are just really a sampling of the many, many analyses currently underway. And over the next few years, we'll be reporting more. This graph depicts the NAS three-year graduation rate for each of our undergraduate colleges by the type of institution that they're coming from. So pick one bar here, the red bar, that depicts those three-year graduation rates for the public 2 years. What's interesting here, and I could spend a lot of time on this graph, I'll spend just a moment, is if you look at the College of Design, across the board, their rates are fairly low because the College of Design has a curriculum that requires 4 years no matter when you come in. There's really no advantage to, or you don't gain some of the preliminary coursework because you have to start from scratch. For our College of Biological Sciences, this slide provides the 3- and 4-year graduation rates for students from the 7 primary community colleges. Those with the highest graduation rates are coming from MCTC. The next slide, for 10 UMTC majors, the graph shows the NAS 3-year graduation rates based on the sending institution. For most, but not all, the highest graduates are from the private institutions, the blue bars. However, for economics, it's the students from the community colleges who perform the best. Keeping with the theme of majors, this slide depicts the NAS 3-year graduation rate for various majors for those students who transferred from one place, Normandale, and of course, the number of students might be smaller for some of these majors. Next slide, for the psychology major, the slide shows the 3-year graduation rates for the 10 sending institutions. Next slide, and the final slide in this sequence shows the student of color NAS 3-year graduation rates from the top 10 sending institutions based on the number of students of color they send. So these data and analyses are not intended to alter the admissions decisions for the institution, but to indicate where the U of M Twin Cities needs to enhance student support, as the provost mentioned, in particular majors and for particular colleges. This data set provides a wealth of information for us on how our transfer students are performing as they enter this university and graduate, and we have just begun to tap that. Finally, for my slides, this slide shows the relationship among number of credits as you enter, the GPA as you enter as a transfer student, and the 3-year graduation rates for NAS. The obvious trend here is more credits and a higher GPA, you're doing better. We have a basic policy at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities that we will not accept a transfer student unless she or he has 26 credits. Basically 1 year of coursework because preliminary or previous analysis indicated they were very bad bets for retention and graduation. And we do have one debt slide similar to the debt slides we show you for freshmen. The numbers are not significantly different. The overall debt at graduation at around $24,000 is a bit less.
So as promised, the last couple slides are a deeper dive into the CERU data from spring 2018. And when comparing to all undergrads, transfer students responded very similarly in a lot of the categories, including GPA, academic experience, educational value, quality of faculty instruction, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, less satisfaction with the course access related to their majors and their overall social experience, which we've seen that trend for some time. And then the last CERU slide, again, similar to the previous slide, is really all about sense of belonging. And they answer similarly around climate for diversity, safety and security on campus, but are less satisfied in spaces of feeling welcome on campus, feeling valued as a part of our university community, and then the largest gap with feeling a sense of belonging. And we're striving to improve that sense of belonging. We think it's important to take a look back. I think in the last 10 to 12 years, we've done a lot as an institution to impact this transfer student experience and overall student experience. So this slide really shows a lot of those high-level buckets around organization, leadership, curriculum, learning, et cetera. And Bob and I shared some of this with you at the February meeting when we discussed the enrollment strategy, and a lot of the things that we've done in the enrollment plan impact transfer students as well. But a few of the highlights, we mentioned the Transfer Summit, which is an annual gathering of university leaders to really continue to look at transfer student data and look at additional initiatives that we can continue to advance transfer student success. I wanted to highlight A+, which is an advising tool for academic advisors to manage their caseloads. It sends them alerts about their students and it allows them to refer students for services on campus. I think that's a great success. And we have many other things like transfer courses. Some colleges offer those courses. And so there's a lot that has been happening to continue to support transfer students. So if we were to sort of summarize some of the barriers and challenges in our work, I think naturally we focus on the incoming first-year freshman students, which means we also have limited resources to support transfer students. Our Minnesota State colleagues are really trying to retain their students and prevent them from going and migrating other places, and speaks to that softening pool that Vice Provost McMaster alluded to. We are a decentralized campus, so helping students navigate and understand that to be successful in their experience, and we have mentioned less financial aid and scholarships. And we need to have visions and dreams, right? So we want to aspire to do a few things as we continue to improve these student experiences, not only improving the graduation rates and enhancing partnerships with our greater Minnesota system campuses, but we'd love to have a physical space like a transfer center where transfer students could go and get all of their questions asked. Of course, more money for transfer students, need-based and merit-based scholarships. We have started to identify students who are coming in with sort of trio-like experiences so that maybe we could try to offer them some additional support because they may have left that kind of a program on their campuses. It would be great to have a couple of general transfer advisors, so transfer students, when they're thinking of transfers, don't have to navigate our complex college systems, but in turn could just speak with some general transfer advisors. Vice Provost McMaster mentioned national recruiting, and of course, he also would love a statewide transfer summit where we could bring all the leaders across the state to have a better conversation, convene a conversation about the transfer student experience.
So that's our story this morning. We've told you every bit of information we know about transfer students, and we're anxious to have a discussion and have your questions.
Well, if you told us everything, I don't know if we should ask any questions. No, this is an important topic, and there's lots of interest. I think the first hand went up about a minute into the presentation. So we'll start with Student Representative Dice.
Thank you, Regent Omari. I had a couple questions. The first one was, so you were talking a little bit about the 3-year grad rates from some like community and technical colleges, and some of them were a lot lower than others, like in the 30% range of graduating within that 3-year that you're aiming for. And I was just wondering why that might be. Like, are their transfer credits just not getting accepted as much, or like is the University of Minnesota not accepting many of their credits from their school? Theoretically, they're doing some of the similar programs and things as the other schools. So I was just wondering why that was. And then I have 2 other questions, but go ahead. Sure.
So, Chair Omari and Representative Dice, I'll take a first crack at that, and maybe my colleagues would like to join in. To be honest, the data set we're looking at is probably raising more questions than answers right now because of the details in it. But most of the students, most of the transfer students who arrive here have completed the Minnesota transfer curriculum, something we did not talk about today, which basically harmonizes the general education, liberal education requirements across the state. So basically, you finish your gen ed requirements at Normandale, it's harmonized through the Minnesota transfer curriculum, you're good to go here on the Twin Cities. So I'm not quite sure it's a credit issue. It may be a preparation issue in terms of certain places not having the right preliminary courses for entering certain majors here. Those are the kinds of questions we want to dig into so we can reach back to those institutions and say, let's figure out how to improve these pipelines.
And we'll see if we can double back to your other two questions.
Sure. Thank you.
Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters. Would you put the slide back up, the look back slide right there? Well, the presentation is great. You know, we've treated transfer students as sort of second-class citizens for up until recently. My point with this and what strikes me is that our operational excellence program reduced administrative costs by $90 million. We've taken the approach of reallocation. And I would remind my colleagues who are dismissive of this reallocation strategy that one of the places that that money goes is into programs like this. This list of services costs money. So if there's anybody who is against reallocation, they need to tell us, to us, to say where it is that they would oppose these investments. These are investments that are in our budget every year. That's reallocation dollars are part of that money that's used to pay for this. All the other student services, hiring great faculty, we just heard about the tenure, that doesn't come free either in a highly competitive market. So thank you again for the presentation. I love the word transfer out. I don't know if you made that up or that the suffix just been around for a while.
We did not transfer.
No, we can't take credit for that.
Well, come on.
Okay, we'll
Just
take credit for it.
Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair Amari. Thank you, panel. I think Provost Hanson mentioned right in the beginning about the transfer and looking at enhanced diversity. She used that term. And this is a very big interest for me. I've had a lot of discussions with different people in the last few days about that. And I think, as you know, I come from a community where over 50% of the kids in grade school are English second language, 51 different dialects, and it's growing. And but even for Greater Minnesota and for the University of Minnesota. And I know some of the issues dealing with the English second language families, cost is a big thing. The other part of it, culture, living separate from their parents, that's an issue, I understand that. But a lot of them in my community end up going to places like Midwest Community College. They end up, they might try to get to Marshall. It's a little bit more of a commute, or go to Sioux Falls. A couple of universities over there where they could go. So I guess my question is, what are we doing, or what can we do to reach out more to Greater Minnesota and to this diverse culture to help them find a way in here? Another meeting I had just recently at the Extension office in Worthington with Brian Steeves, the executive director here, we had a meeting and how to use Extension better than we do. For example, we talked about diversity down there with the Extension people, and they're involved with them, 4-H and other things, trying to integrate. But they've never had, for example, they've never had anybody from admissions to visit from our university. Never. And so I'm just wondering, what can we do as a university, to reach out to the Greater Minnesota more, and especially this diverse culture that we have that's growing? And there are some things I'm looking like for scholarship programs that we can offer. Locally, we're looking at doing that, but I'm just looking for something about what can we do?
Vice Provost McMaster.
Chair Omari and Regent Simonson. Our admissions office, and I check on this on a regular basis, is very aggressive in going out into Greater Minnesota for recruitment. Now, they have limited resources, so they're not going to go to every single high school, and they're not going to be able to go to every single college out there. There's 37 min-state campuses. But they have strategic partners in greater Minnesota, strong networks out there. And so I'm afraid that you may have identified one where we don't have a network, but I wouldn't extrapolate that to the fact we're not doing good work in greater Minnesota. We also have to look at the shifts that are going on in terms of the geodemographics of the state, and I appreciate the increased diversity within the greater Minnesota community, but the shift has been, the migration has been for the population coming into the Twin Cities metropolitan area, where we now have about 3.6 million of the 5.6 million citizens of the state. And so we have to be attentive to that as well as national recruitment. So in terms of the resources we have, I'm convinced that we spend a fair share of our energy in greater Minnesota recruiting. Your idea of using extension is an interesting one, and I'm not sure whether we're tapping into that resource.
Thank you. Regent Powell.
Thanks, Chair Omari, and thank you for the presentation. So I'm trying to sort of crystallize this for myself, and I think that, so what I would be interested in knowing, and maybe you've got the numbers to hand or you can get them, I'm interested in the total time to graduation if you pursue the transfer student track. And so that would be a first metric. I'm guessing it's going to be, 5 years, but it's not 4. So in other words, on average, if you end up being a transfer student, what's the total time from when you first entered your first college to when you graduated from the transfer? That's a metric I think it would be helpful to see. I'd like to see the percent who never graduate, and I'd like to see the total level of indebtedness. And I was surprised to see, your number that was, is fairly comparable, but I would think if, let's just say, on average, transfer students take an extra year to get their degree, it seems like, it seems like the total level of indebtedness would be significantly higher for a person who, for whatever reason, has to go through the transfer track. So I'd like to have those numbers, and the reason I'm interested is because I think it's, among other things, it's if you decide you have to do that, and kids do it for a lot of reasons, but it's an expensive path to take. So I have, 2 data points, which you can project, globally if you want. One daughter who transferred after 1 year, almost pain-free, to here. It's just much, much easier if you do it early on. And another one who was going to transfer after 2. And 2 years is really problematic, as you guys know. And she ended up saying, I'm going to be an undergraduate, forever, and it's going to cost a lot. And I wonder if the economics of transferring later are what are driving, that graph down over the last 5 or 6 years. But so I'd like to understand sort of some of the total, beginning to end. How long does it take to graduate? How many don't graduate? What's the level of indebtedness? Because I think that would say to us, this is really expensive, and we have kids that come out of this path with way more debt, and we have to figure out a way. I think one strategy would be, if you think you're unhappy, you're way better off doing it at the end of year 1 than you are end of year 2. Anyway, comments, maybe a few questions,
Sure.
And thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. And some of the nuances that you all provided in this presentation, I think get at that as well. And transferring from a 2-year institution would seem much more seamless after 2 years than a 4-year after 2 years. So, presenters.
Yeah, Chair Omari and Regent Powell, just a few responses to that. One is we have looked at the modal time to degree for transfer students, and the modal number of years is 5, but 6 is very close. And what that tells you, if students are graduating in 6 years and they've come in with 2 years, it's a 6-year degree. And of course, we do measure a 6-year graduation rate. As an aside, there is no national standard for transfer graduation as there is for freshmen. The board here created a metric, which was the 3-year graduation rate, given on balance, most students arrive with 2 years. And so that's the answer to that question. We know that, it's 5. but 6 is close. In terms of indebtedness, I think what you're seeing in terms of the lower number is that a high percentage of these students are spending their time at lower cost institutions. And so in fact, if you spend 2 years at Normandale at half the tuition and you come in, you're going to have half the borrowing probably. And that's what I think you see playing out in those numbers. Now, there's also the issue of burning through Pell and state grant that affects this. And I think Associate Vice Provost Von Voris might be able to address that.
Regent Omari, Regent Paul, and members of the board. First of all, state grant is really for 8 terms. So if a student does use up 4 terms at a community college, they really only have 4 terms when they get here. Pell, we have a little more flexibility with, and then our U Promise program is 2 years for our transfer students. So one of the things that we do when transfers come in is we look at their aid and how much aid they have left, and our One Stop does a lot of outreach and works with those students. The other thing that we put into place, we have some funds that we call completion funds, and when we notice a student is close to graduation and is running into financial difficulty, anyone on our campus can nominate those students, and we take a look at them to see how we can help them by giving them some aid in order to complete. And so that's why I feel they can keep their debt lower in that regard. But you are correct, taking a look at those that can't finish, we want to do that as well if they do run out of funding. But we really try and keep a close eye on those particular students.
Thank you. Regent Shu?
Thank you, Chair Omari. Thank you, presenters. Excellent presentation. I would like to touch on the subject of the freshman transfer balance, and I think we could solve a lot of these problems just by admitting more freshmen and enrolling more freshmen. And in the past, my understanding was that housing was one of the bottlenecks for that. And obviously, we've made a lot of investments in housing. I wish we would have built more housing rather than renovating Pioneer, but that ship has sailed. So I think that's one issue that I think you guys brought up as something that we should have another conversation about, and I agree with that. In terms of the 3-year metric, I'm not even sure that's the right metric to look at, because I think we should look at what happens in each of those categories in terms of the number of credits they're actually coming in as, because basically we're saying 3 years, we don't know if the 3 years is for someone who came in as a senior or someone who came in as a freshman, basically. Yep. And anytime, we're getting to an average completion rate of 5 years, I think we're starting, we don't want to be there, as we talked about. And so I think maybe that's not the right metric to look at, because it doesn't really show us that much. And the other thing is, what is the deal with Green River College in Washington State? What is the connection there?
Do you know? But you know? Associate Vice Provost Clark has a very good answer for that.
Chair Omari and Regent Sue, I know that there's a strong science and engineering pipeline that is coming from that particular community college. And in fact, that's shown up a couple of years in a row that there are 2 colleagues from the College of Science and Engineering going there next week to learn more about that pipeline and even build on that pipeline.
Okay, thank you.
Good. All right, Regent Anderson, you're up.
Thank you. Chair Omari, Mr. McMaster, Vice Provost McMaster, great presentation. Like a little more slides on data, if you could do that.
I can do that next time. No
Anyway,
problem.
So I'm just more maps, I'm a geography major, yeah. I'm going to talk just a little bit about, and I don't know if I have a question, but since the time I've been a student at the University of Minnesota, I believe that transfer students, I think probably the word is the University of Minnesota, probably more so than any land-grant college in America, has been friendly to transfer students. It's been a pathway for Minnesota students to get their degrees. Regent Paul, I thought the same thing when I looked at the debt, but then I thought of all the kids, students that come from the community colleges who are paying $7,000 a year in tuition, instead of 15, 16, 17 here and go 2 years. It's a great pathway. Anecdotally, I'll tell you that in the last 10 years, as I've gotten this position and I delve more into it, I have looked at college as less of a rite of passage, which it was for my generation. We moved away from home, lived in a dormitory, to now students and their families are really focused on education and getting that education at the lowest possible cost. I think that's a financial reality we have to know here. I know in Alexandria we have tons of kids that stay home their first 2 years. They go to Alexandria Tech and Community College, and they say they're going to get their generals out of their way there, and then they're going to go to the U of M, or they're going to go to Morehead State, or they're going to go somewhere. So they are focused on that financial deal, and I think that's great. I think sometimes legislators and people that look at the cost of education don't take into some of those things that have been done to lower the cost of education in choosing your own pathway. You have a chance. So I think that's great. Regent Simonson's left the room, but I was going to say that, I have probably the same heart he does for the rural student, and we have lately put in the land-grant legacy scholarships for people in the rural areas. Some of the things I think we can do better at, and understanding where education has been and where it's going, are what I call the dual credit systems in the high school. Again, anecdotally, I know we have a ton of students in Alexandria that take dual credit classes, which mean they get credit for high school and for college for attending certain classes. And instructors at the high school, I always use the term, it's the wrong term, but I always say they're kind of deputized by a college to teach that class. They check their credentials. One of the things I think we should do here more to help our top line, because then the college gets paid part of that state aid that comes from state government to the high school, is we should work. I know in Alexandria we have St. Cloud State, we have Southwest State, and we have those schools that are in there every single day trying to get accreditation to teach classes. I think we need to get the University of Minnesota, Provost Hanson, more into those dual credit classes, because the value of the Block M, nothing against Minnesota State, but it's really seen as great value in greater Minnesota. And I will say, I did extend Regent Simonson, I was saying I did extend an invitation to Vice Provost McMaster to come out to rural Minnesota one day, and it cost me lunch, but I think I got him to see some of our high schools out there, and maybe a little different than you had thought. But anyway, I think we are friendly to transfer students. We have to continue to be that way, and I think it's great. That's my comments.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a wonderful presentation, and I think it's a really good setup as we move into our strategic planning conversation in the coming months. There's nothing intrinsically more valuable, at least from my perspective, in a transfer student versus a person who started as a freshman. Ultimately, we look at the long-term production, how many graduates, if you're putting out 5,000 graduates, I'm not really as concerned about whether they started here as freshmen or whether they transferred in after a year or two. Fundamentally, you've got 5,000 folks that are going to go out and make the world a better place and serve this community and so on. The history of the transfer student in Minnesota is something with which I'm strongly familiar in my various relationships with this board and with the university. When we came out of the 80s with devastating graduation rates and other significant challenges, the university changed how it operated. At that point in time, transfer students, it wasn't really something you had to worry about, and nor was in-state versus non-resident, because Minnesota kids weren't turned away. All Minnesota kids were able, with high school diplomas, were admitted. Things have changed a lot since then, and I can say from my perspective, and from others that I've spoken with whom I served, there was a surprise at how difficult it has gotten for Minnesota students to access the University of Minnesota. And so I think this is important. As we go into the strategic planning process, I think that really two different things of great importance, and obviously more than that, but the two I'll mention. One is the transfers within the system. has a lot to do with the success of the other campuses beside the Twin Cities campus. But along with that, then, what is that balance? I do notice, as we've seen data in the past, that some colleges are far more prone to have transfers than others. And so that somewhat opens the question of what's the purpose of the transfer student. If transfer students don't have access to certain programs, why are we saying they don't have access to those programs, but they do have access to these other programs? These are all important conversations, I think. But the whole concept of moving to transfers was that the university was admitting so many students who were not in degree-granting programs. They'd sit here for a couple of years and they'd rack up a whole bunch of student debt, and then they would leave, either because for personal reasons or it wasn't working out, the academic rigor was too much. And working with HECB and the other systems, it was decided that it made a lot more sense to use what was a developing and now very well-developed community college and state university system. Metro State was really just coming online at the time, to say much better for a student to go to Normandale, but perhaps get an associate's degree. That would be a degree that would serve them in looking for employment, but then they could move into the university to pursue the baccalaureate degree. And one of the big things that we had to deal with at the time, even within the university system, is you could be at Morris and take an introductory econ class, Econ 101, as a 4-credit class, and you'd come to the Twin Cities and it was a 5-credit class and you had to take it over again because you didn't meet the requirement. And so the state worked really hard to try to make this seamless transfer happen, and I think that we've seen that it's been extremely, extremely successful here at the university. But so there's a real history as to why transfers are a big part of what we do. But I think that as we move into the strategic planning process, we should have some real strong conversations about what that right mix is. Because for every spot that we maintain to allow a transfer student to come in, there's a quality Minnesota high school graduate that is not admitted. And that is having an impact on the perception of the university in St. Paul and across the state. And so I think that finding that balance should be very much a part of the strategic planning conversation. This is a wonderful setup to take us into that, so I appreciate you doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. With that, thank you to the presenters. We appreciate it. We imagine we'll see you back on this same topic at some point in the future. I would move to Provost Hanson to discuss our consent report, which is before us for review and action. Provost Hanson.
Thank you, Chair Omari. On the Twin Cities campus, the College of Continuing and Professional Studies is creating a BS degree in Health and Wellbeing Sciences. This program previously existed as a thematic option within the inter-college program major and makes use of existing courses and resources. The College of Design is creating a graduate minor in lighting design. The Duluth campus is creating a Bachelor of Business Administration and undergraduate minor in Human Resource Management. As noted in your materials, this degree previously existed as a sub-plan, so turning it into a freestanding degree makes use of existing courses and resources. In addition, UMD is creating an undergraduate certificate in theater design and production. Crookston campus is creating 2 undergraduate certificates, one in health management, another for nursing home administrators. And as is typical, the colleges and campuses are refreshing degree options, and programs are adding and discontinuing sub-plans as well as adding online delivery options. One other thing to note, the Department of Asian Languages and Literatures in the College of Liberal Arts on the Twin Cities campus is changing its name to Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. That primarily reflects an emphasis they have on studies of Arabic and Arab language and literatures. I also want to note item 4, in which the President is requesting approval to grant Dr. Eileen Harwood faculty emerita status. We brought this to you today because the board policy on faculty emeriti defines this status as a tenured faculty member who has retired from the university. And Dr. Harwood was a term faculty member in public health, so she did not have tenure. We therefore need your approval to confer this status upon her retirement.
Thank you for that. I'd entertain a motion and a second, and then we will have discussion.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Questions and comments regarding the consent report? Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Omari, and perhaps Provost Hanson or President Kaler. I'm interested in in a thumbnail outline of how the emeritus status works. You just started to kind of delve in there. Can you put a little more color around that? I just don't, and it isn't specific to this individual in any way. It just feels like I don't understand it. And is there any more you can bring to light on that?
Provost Hanson.
Chair Omari and Regent McMillan, it's an honorary status for those who have retired, and it really is a kind of an indication that they've retired in good standing at the university, and they still have a kind of an affiliation that may actually involve some elements of actual operational connection. They may still be participating in various ways in the life of the department or the school, but mainly it's a sign that they retired in good standing and you know, are honored by their affiliation with the institution.
Follow-up? Thank you, Chair Omari, and thank you for that honorary perspective helps. Is it something that we dole out quite judiciously, I assume?
Well, you dole it out a lot, so it's judicious, but it would be unusual to deny it for a faculty member who had served well and was in good standing at retirement.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just to understand, though, that this is unique because it was not a tenure position. So that would be where you'd have the judiciousness, because if tenure already existed, it wouldn't have the same, you know, requirement. And just making sure I understand that. Thank you, Provost Hanson.
And if I may add, this is a long-term faculty member whose professional identity is with the University of Minnesota.
I want to be perfectly clear. I'm not in any way suggesting anything about the individual. I just was trying to understand the office, and that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other comments and questions on the consent report? Yes, Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair Omari, and Provost Hanson. On the new academic programs, how do you evaluate the need for those and the opportunities postgraduate? How do you, and why does it cost, or does it cause any redundancy in the current programs?
Chair Omari and Regent Simonson, we evaluate carefully to see whether there are redundancies, and when an academic unit proposes a new program, it's vetted across all of the rest of the campus, and if there's a unit that already feels it's providing that program, objections are made in the course of the evaluation of the process, and then there is a committee which actually undertakes an evaluation of any objections that might be made. And sometimes there are processes of adjustment, sometimes proposals are withdrawn. We do evaluate them for that, and we allow others to participate in the evaluation of that. Just to say, we seek out the opinions of the other faculty and colleges.
Thank you, Provost Hanson. And every September in this committee, we have a full-on review of how this process works, which also includes combining programs and actually discontinuing programs. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Omari. Just a quick comment and a question. So I do like the addition of the online programming at Crookston, and I think also in CSE. My question is regarding the emeritus title. Is that right? Is there any financial component associated with that? Because none is mentioned in here. So it's, my understanding based on previous questioning is that it is just a purely ceremonial title.
Provost Hanson?
Chair Omari, Regent Hsu, that's right. There's no financial.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions regarding the consent report? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Provost Hanson, information items?
Thank you, Chair Omari. The information item in your May docket is our regular report of student, faculty, and staff special accomplishments. It's a very long list, and we're proud of that, but I want to highlight one item in particular. President Kaler mentioned in this already, but it's really important to draw attention to it. The Institute for Advanced Study has been awarded a $1 million grant from the Mellon Foundation to develop a statewide humanities-led environmental stewardship and community initiative that centers on respect for traditional indigenous ways of understanding the world. There are a lot of departments and campuses that have been involved in this project. Mellon is wildly enthusiastic about it and has been advertising it around the country as an important initiative. It sprang from our university's understanding of our critical responsibilities to the communities that support us, and perhaps in particular to the communities upon whose original land we sit. And it was based in our faith that the central contributions that the humanities can make to addressing critical environmental problems facing our world. And that's one of the things that's interesting about it, I think, that we often talk about the scientific breakthroughs that we have in addressing issues of environmental degradation and our need for environmental stewardship. This is a humanities-based proposal. That's why Mellon is funding it. But as our state has become less homogeneous, we've recognized that our university has to reflect in new ways on its land-grant mission and on the historical context and present implications of that mission. This project will advance that reflection.
Thank you, and I appreciate you pointing out the land that we sit on today. Regent Powell?
Thanks, Chair Omari. Provost Hanson, I also noted in this information report this very exciting $9.7 million grant from the National Institute of Health, the BRAIN initiative, and the purpose is to develop new technologies around cochlear implant technology, and that's a consortium, and I know there's some device companies involved in that. I'm just really curious, is this the sort of thing that potentially leads to the creation of IP that the university licenses? Or I mean, I know that Vice President Kramer is here, but I'm just curious about these big projects like this that involve multiple universities and private individuals. How is the IP shared?
Provost Hanson?
Chair Omari and Regent Powell, yes, it is the answer to the first question. It does indeed often lead to IP. The arrangements for sharing may depend upon what portion of the grant activity led to it and who was involved in it. And I don't know if the Vice President for Research wants to say more about this particular proposal.
I think that was a comprehensive answer. It's negotiated prior to the award being made.
And I'm sure some nice follow-up questions can happen if necessary.
Thank you.
Any other comments on the information items? All right, thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.
Very good. Hopefully you'll tell them it can be.